Super Mario 3D World is obviously another phenomenal entry in the 3D Mario franchise. This is a game that I've always enjoyed, but not necessarily one I've appreciated for its level design until my most recent playthrough. I always viewed 3D World as a multiplayer co-op adventure, and it felt like a title that was meant to be played in that manner. And although I have dabbled in my occasional casual single-player playthrough of the title, both on my Wii U and on the Switch, I would almost vastly prefer playing every other 3D Mario title if I'm going at it alone. And with good reason. 4-player co-op for a 3D Mario game is not really the norm, and the levels designed for this game are wide and zoomed out, allowing for plenty of space and accommodation for you and your friends to go on this adventure. And quite frankly, it's a phenomenal time, especially in the right setting, with the right group of people. But that's the thing, I've always had that right setting, I've had the right group of people, I've had my main circle of friends that I game with. Whether it's our random multiplayer party game or the new Super Mario Bros. Series, we've gone through these experiences and completed them in a fun and sometimes even unhealthy competitive manner. I strongly debated bringing the group together for this video. In my mind, the best way to give Mario 3D World a fighting chance to rank amongst the best of the 3D Mario games was for me to analyze it in what I thought was the way in which it was meant to be played, that being the 4-player co-op run. But the reality is, I don't need to play the game like that again. I've already done so, and it is amazing. Also, getting 4 people in their 20s and 30s together to try to run through an adventure that would take up to 20 hours is not really ideal today. So I decided I'm just gonna go at this alone and analyze it the same way I've analyzed every other 3D Mario prior to this one. But I came into the title with preconceived notions. I came into the title with expectations that had already been set by previous games as well as previous playthroughs of 3D World. And in case you haven't kept up with the entirety of my 3D Mario Deep Dive series over the last year, I want to quickly summarize my feelings and conclusions that I developed after going through those titles, specifically from the angle of the stage design as well as the objective locations. Starting off with Super Mario 64. While yes, the stages in the game, especially at the surface, seem like a giant open sandbox, due to how the stages and objectives themselves are actually designed, most of the objectives in that title feel like direct linear pathways, which could honestly be ripped out of Mario 64 and placed into a linear 3D Mario adventure. There are still tons of stars that do require a lot of searching or problem solving, but many of them are also directly on a linear path, and it's very obvious in the direction that you're meant to go. And as you move along those directions, it provides that experience, that platforming experience. This would vary in comparison to something like Banjo-Kazooie or even Donkey Kong 64, in which the focus of the design of those stages is a lot less on the actual platforming and more on the search itself. Mario 64, at almost no point in time, does not feel like a platformer. It always does. And it does a fairly good job at it once you get used to the controls at least. Now Super Mario Sunshine takes this a step even further. When you played Super Mario 64, the stars that required searching or platforming or puzzle solving, they for the most part started off the exact same way, and it did require you to follow a path and figure out where you needed to go. Mario Sunshine, through most of the base game, the main objectives that are required to complete the title, removes the element of the open-ended search, instead replacing it with episodic objectives, where you know exactly where you need to go and more or less the path that's needed to be taken to get there. And while yes, the stages in those games once again are giant sandboxes, the pathways that you're meant to follow in order to get to those shine sprites do feel like a linear 3D Mario stage, and they feel like they could be inside a linear 3D Mario game, with the ultimate linear platforming tests being in the hidden area shines. Even the 100 coin collection shines feel more like a platforming challenge in most of the stages than an open-ended search. As a matter of fact, I went through most of Super Mario Sunshine not feeling like I was experiencing just a general search like I did in Mario 64, until I started to collect all of the blue coins, which made Sunshine feel like the primary objective was the action platforming that was found with the shine sprites, and the open-ended treasure hunt was done with the blue coins. So the main objective was just the linear platformer, and the full completion was the scavenger hunt. Mario 64 very much felt like that too, but this was a lot more defined, the shine sprites and the blue coins. After that, it went even a step further with Super Mario Galaxy, where now the open-ended search was pretty much completely taken out of the game, only really showing up in a few rare moments. But this was brought back with Super Mario Galaxy 2. The additional green stars that were unlocked after completing the game turns the game into more of a scavenger hunt where you have to spend a lot more time going through these linear stages looking for that objective. And just like in Mario Sunshine, it made the green star hunt one of the most enjoyable aspects of the game for me. Now in the case of Super Mario 3D Land, each stage did have star medals to find, but it often never felt like a hunt to look for those star medals. Not as much as the green stars in Mario Galaxy 2. These star medals are very fun and they make 3D Land a much better experience when you're going for all of them, but the fun part is trying to collect them along your way rather than trying to find them, with the challenge more often than not being figuring out how to grab them rather than where to find them. These challenges made Super Mario 3D Land one of my favorite 3D Mario titles altogether, because of how much they focused on the challenge when it comes to the actual platforming itself. Now in fairness, it takes a while to get there because the first 8 levels can be run through pretty easily without a thought, especially if you're a 3D Mario veteran, but that full completion experience is one that will give you a challenge at least the first time you try it. And that's primarily because they do a pretty good job finding ways to make the star medal hunt enticing. Now I figured that Mario 3D World was just going to be like Mario 3D Land without the strong focus on the platforming. I figured going into these levels that are much better designed with much more flashy characters, the world feeling more alive, with plenty of real estate for you and your friends, that I would go into this title as a single player experience, and the only thought I would have is that it's just way too easy, too boring to an extent. Quite frankly, that's how I felt about Mario Galaxy in any of my most recent playthroughs. And I think if somebody's goal is to just head to the flagpole in every single stage in Mario 3D World, that is the case. It is actually, for the most part, mind-numbingly boring and very oversimplified, with a lot of the enjoyment being the charm of the levels rather than the actual design. This is in contrast to Super Mario Galaxy 2, for example, where the stages were a lot more challenging and kept you on your toes in order to get to the end of every objective. But unlike Super Mario Galaxy 2, there is a green star challenge in this game as well, but they are actually in the stages as you go through the level. They are not final objectives, they are collectible MacGuffins along your way in the same way that the star medal was in Super Mario 3D Land. But where in Super Mario 3D Land, the question was more how to grab the coin rather than where to find it, in 3D World, thanks to the vast size of these stages, it's about where the stars are located. There are 3 green stars in every level, and each one of them is hidden fairly well, I would say. And quite frankly, if you're somebody that wanted an open-ended 3D Mario game that doesn't kick you out after you grab every single star, 3D World kind of does that, except the stages are just not an open sandbox. They're a very long, linear, wide hallway. So as a player that's looking for full completion, and as a player that refuses to move on to the next stage unless I grab every MacGuffin in the one that I'm currently playing, Super Mario 3D World felt like a collectathon as much as the best of the collectathons in the genre. I'm not kidding. I had a blast running through 3D World, and it is mainly because I was looking for the green stars along the way. Now, there's still fun to have playing this as if it's a typical linear 3D Mario game where you're trying to get through it as fast as you can, but like I said before, due to how vast the stages are and how they're meant to accommodate 4 players on there at once, the platforming just feels oversimplified in a lot of ways. Speedrunners can definitely find ways to make it more exciting, but then again, speedrunners can find ways to make anything more exciting. But Super Mario 3D World for me felt a lot more in line with how it felt when I went through Super Mario Bros. 2, and it's more than just the option to choose between those same 4 characters. Right, that was like one of the big deals of this game when it came out. It was going to be the 4 players, and it was the same 4 from Super Mario Bros. 2. Mario, Luigi, Toad, and Peach. Mario's an all-arounder, Luigi can jump a little bit higher than Mario, but he's a bit slipperier, Toad's fast, but he fails at verticality, and Peach has her hover, which usually makes me pick Peach more than any of the other characters. I did spend most of this game choosing a random character before every stage just so I can kind of mix it up a bit, otherwise I knew I would continuously go back to Peach. And you can still get through the entire game with every one of the characters available, but some of them are kind of broken in the Switch version of this title. For some reason, when they re-released this game, they made it so that the characters were 20 to 30% faster. And while it might break a few moments, I do think it's a lot more fun because of it. The game does have a run button, and honestly, I think Toad is so fast that you probably can get through the entire game without using the run button if you're playing as Toad. And I don't know, I feel like I just always enjoyed this one more specifically because it was faster. I actually did go back and forth about whether I'd be playing 3D World on the Wii U or on the Switch for this video, and I opted for the Switch version just because, statistically speaking, if you're somebody that's watching this video, you are more likely to have played the Switch version than the Wii U one. But anyway, the characters themselves are not the only reason 3D World reminded me so much of Super Mario Bros. 2. See, my experience with Super Mario Bros. 2 wasn't on the NES, nor was it on the SNES, it was actually on the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance was unique in that it added a red coin hunt in every stage. The red coin hunt in Super Mario Bros. 2 makes the full completion experience that much more enjoyable. It gives you a reason to explore some of these giant 2D levels in Super Mario Bros. 2, and it gives this linear platformer a feeling of being a collectathon. The same goes for Super Mario 3D World with the green stars. The levels are fine, they're fun to look at, the music is charming, the characters are well animated, but the green stars laid out in this game allow you the chance to search every nook and cranny and really appreciate what went into this title, just like the red coins did in Super Mario Bros. 2. Now, if you've seen my previous retrospectives, you know how this is going to move. I'm going to tackle this game on a world-by-world basis. Each world will get its own segments, and in each of those segments, I will analyze the levels laid out as well as how well hidden the green stars are in each of those stages. I've gone through every single collectible MacGuffin in all of the previous 3D Mario games, and that's going to be no different here. With all that being said, pick your favorite character and meet me at World 1. Super Mario 3D World's opening stages start off about exactly as any Mario veteran would expect them to. The first world takes place in an illustrious green grassland, the skies are blue, and even the enemies that are up against Mario look like they're having a great time. With the upbeat music and the simplest of level designs, a player is able to jump right into this game and learn all that it has to offer. The game allows somewhat of a unique overworld that allows players to run around a lot more than they could in the past, where they would be stuck on a linear pathway. It doesn't really change much in the grand scheme of things, but it does allow the player to feel like this adventure is a lot more grand than it actually is. You still have the basic overworld map like you've had ever since Super Mario Bros. 3, but now in this giant 3D adventure you have the freedom to move around without being limited to a single dimension like you could in the old 2D titles. Upon entering World 1-1, titled Super Bell Hill, you'll notice that for the most part, every stage in this game is going to have 4 collectibles for you to grab along your way. These will be required for full completion, 3 green stars in every stage as well as a stamp, with the stamps more often than not being slightly better hidden than the green stars. One of the first things that I noticed about World 1-1 is just how beautiful this game looks when you first boot it up. Now in fairness, I'm playing it at an upscaled 4K resolution, so it looks better now than it did when I played it on the Wii U a few years ago, but the art style the game has to offer does make it a treat on the eyes. Perhaps the biggest advertised gimmick of this game, in addition to the multiplayer and the 4 separate characters, is the new Bell power-up. There is a bell theme in this game because of said power-up, and you'll notice it even on the trees in the shapes that they have. And that's why the first stage is named after the Super Bell. This Super Bell power-up turns Mario into Cat Mario, which not only grants the player's ability to have a melee attack on the ground, but it also allows them to traverse upwards on a vertical wall, making this one of the most useful power-ups in the entirety of the franchise, in my opinion. As you run through this stage, you'll notice that the pathways, while linear, are very wide, often allowing for alternate pathways to be taken by characters in order to not only allow the player to have more real estate to search through, but it also allows for the game to be a lot more enjoyable on repeat playthroughs. These alternate pathways very much remind me of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, because similar to the games made for the Blue Blur, the alternate routes, which are usually harder to reach or not along the main path, often will reward you with an easier route to follow or a collectible MacGuffin or some kind of a treat in the form of a power-up, making the mastery and the replayability of these titles just that much more enticing. Now, given that this is the first stage of the game, it's going to be fairly simple, and that's included in the collectible MacGuffins along the way, with the first green star sitting along the way on the main path just above this clear pipe. As the player moves forward, searching as much as they'd like to their heart's content, they get to experiment quite a bit with the new bell power-up, until they eventually make it to the next segment where they find a glowing green bunny. These bunnies will appear periodically throughout the game, and normally chasing them will reward the player either with a green star or another collectible. They are usually fairly quick, simple tests of the player's ability to control themselves at a high speed. Further along, as is typical in 3D Mario titles, you'll notice green pipes that are sticking out of the walls that'll often take you to bonus areas. The one that you find in World 1-1 will take you to the collectible stamp. Again, this is simply put along the player's path, because it is the first stage of the game, so obviously for the newcomers to the franchise, they have to learn all of these things that would otherwise be fairly commonplace for the Mario veterans. Then finally, for those veterans, if they were the curious type and they were searching through the entire stage as heading through it, they might decide they'd like to experiment with this new Cat Mario power-up and scale the wall upwards, where they will be rewarded not only with additional time to complete the stage, but also a giant bunny rabbit they can chase. Getting a hold of said bunny will provide them with the famous Mega Mushroom. And obviously, where there's a Mega Mushroom involved, there's a fun bit of destruction to be made. Players will need the Mega Mushroom in order to break the solid gray bricks, and only with a ground pound are they able to reach the third and final green star of the stage, making this third green star of the stage one of the more difficult ones to grab early on. Newcomers will very likely miss this one, and even series veterans might have to play through this stage a couple of times to realize that they need to go through a chain of operations in order to reach that green star, which I thought was exciting because it showed me that the green stars in this game are going to be a lot better hidden than what I saw in 3D Land. And with everything completed, I was able to move on to World 1-2, the Koopa Troopa Cave. Given that this is a 1-2 stage, I appreciate that they did the same thing that they've done in so many previous Mario titles, where you start off in a green area and you enter a pipe and it takes you underground. Once again, you would expect that this would be a fairly straightforward linear pathway, especially because the camera's off to the side, similar to how it was in 3D Land, but there are so many different hidden nooks and crannies that allow players to take alternate routes instead of just heading in a direct pathway. These alternate routes are usually in the form of hidden clear pipes in the walls, or they are hidden behind bricks that you can break along your way, making the cat suit very useful here since you can quickly break the bricks with a melee attack. Moving through the stage, players will quickly notice the first green star right along their pathway, followed by a warp block that'll take them to a bonus room. These bonus room challenges will appear periodically and obviously get a little bit more difficult as you run through the adventure, but you'll enter a small space and quickly see a timer, and you'll be tasked at defeating the enemy or accomplishing the task before the time runs out. In this case, defeating the two Koopas will reward the player with the second green star. And as the player moves along ahead through the combination of hitting some invisible blocks that you can't see and jumping through a clear pipe in the wall, the player will find the fairly well hidden stamp for this stage. Once again proving that even early on in this adventure, the hidden MacGuffins required for full completion can and will potentially require players to use quite a bit of effort to find, making the search and collectathon aspect of this linear adventure that much more enjoyable. And that will only be amplified just beyond that, where the third green star is hidden in between a stack of Goombas, requiring the player to perform the perfect ground pound in order to receive their MacGuffin before ending the stage. Now, keep in mind, in this title, similar to the previous 3D Land, will require players to reach the top of the flagpoles on every single stage in order to get full completion. Fortunately, unlike 3D Land, I think it is a lot easier to reach the top of said flagpole in almost every stage in this game, especially because if you make it to the end of the stage with Cat Mario, it'll run right up the flagpole and automatically reach the top. Once you complete World 1-2, there will be some new obstacles and landmarks placed along the world map. One of them is a Toad House, which, as we've seen numerous times in the Mario franchise, will provide players with some extra collectibles that they can grab as they move through the adventure. And the other obstacle that's laid across the map is a Charging Chuck. Quickly defeating the Charging Chucks will not only reward the player with a green star, but it will also allow them to access the next part of World 1. Over here, players will find a bonus room as well as World 1-3, Mount Beanpole. This is a vertical stage, and the way the camera pans to show you the mount that you're going to have to climb is kind of a nice visual of the scope of this title, especially when you consider this would be the first 3D Mario game where you would see something of this caliber in the HD era. Climbing the tree on the right will lead you towards one of those Sprixie fairies, which holds a set of binoculars, and I'll give you a glance of what's to come. and the tree on the left will give you your first green star. Now, given that this is a vertical stage, it makes the Super Bell a lot more enjoyable to use in this stage than any other power-up. Players will need to traverse upwards using POW blocks to destroy enemies along their path, as well as accessing various bonus areas, one of which will require you to collect some blue coins in order to grab the second green star. A fairly simple challenge, but a welcome one nonetheless. And immediately exiting that bonus room, if the player was able to continue to hold their Cat Mario power-up, they'll be able to grab the stamp and move on with the stage. I always appreciated the Goombas with a cat power-up in this game. It's similar to how in previous titles we saw the Tanuki suit being used by the enemies, but in this case the cat power-up is so much more overwhelming and kind of hilarious. At least, it is for me. As the player works their way upwards closer towards the end of the stage, they'll find a switch with a paw print on it that requires the cat power-up in order to activate, which in turn will cause a platform to rise upwards, and using the cat suit they can climb to the top of that platform where they can jump into a cloud and enter another bonus area. These sky bonus areas are very similar to the ones that we saw in 3D Land, which allow you to just quickly run through everything with a star and grab a green star along your way. Beyond that, it's a fairly simple straight shot towards the end of the level where defeating a giant piranha plant will give you access to the flagpole. So in the first 3 stages of this game, we've had a fairly straightforward linear pathway that's generally fairly horizontal, an underground stage that is a lot more narrow and more in line with the 2D games than it is with the 3D titles, and a vertical stage that requires players to climb to the peak, making the game start off feeling fairly unique, and that only continues on with World 1-4, Plessie's Plunging Falls. In previous 3D Mario titles, this might be considered some kind of a secret challenge or a bonus room, but in Super Mario 3D World, this is just a level with an interesting gimmick that's not used all that often in this title. This is also Plessie's inaugural, and so far only appearance in the 3D Mario franchise. She shares similar design features as Yoshi, much in the same way that Dory did Mario 64 DS and New Super Mario Bros. But obviously not the OG Dory in Mario 64. I feel like they could have just brought Dory back for this, but Plessie's a welcome addition. If you're playing the stage in co-op, all 4 characters, or up to 4 characters, will be controlling Plessie at the same time, making it a bit of a mess, but it's fun mayhem. On a single player run through, well, just going through the stage on its own is fun enough by itself. The actual challenge behind trying to grab all 3 stars will give you more trouble than you'd expect. Or at the very least, it did for me. If I had to equate it to anything, it would be similar to the motion control ball challenges that you faced in the Galaxy games, only this time it's regular joystick control. But in the same manner, it's all about mastering the way that Plessie moves, how to time the proper jumps, then how to avoid falling off the stage and make it to the very end with all of the collectibles. The first green star is easy enough right along your path, you just gotta go off the ramp and you can grab it while you're swinging through. Another is pretty well hidden on the left side of the stage behind a waterfall when you might not even realize it's there. And if you don't go for that green star on the main route, if you slow Plessie down and you're very careful in the areas without the walls, you can collect the stamp and head towards the end of the stage, where a well-timed jump off the ramp at the very end will allow you to grab the final green star and complete the stage. And after that, it's back to some regular platforming. World 1-5, the Switch Scramble Circus. The big gimmick here is to move on to the next section, you have to hit every single switch along the way. This is not a new gimmick, it's been used in the previous games, and just like in those titles, running over a switch that you've already activated once will change it back to its default mode. So you kind of have to be strategic about the path that you follow. There are some gimmicks involving springboards as well as enemies along your path, mostly these bumblebees. And prior to making it to the first warp block, a player can wall jump upwards to grab the green star and head out to the next section. And this is where the puzzles might get a little bit more creative, requiring even better timing and mastery of the player's movement. Continuing along the path, a player will access a bonus room where they can grab the second green star, and the third green star will provide a bit of a challenge because it's on a moving bridge, but otherwise it is along your path. And finally, the stamp can be easily collected right before a player makes it to the flagpole. When you complete World 1-5, you make it to the first Captain Toad stage, but prior to that, you might notice a slot machine bonus room pop up on the overworld. Once again, these have been done in previous titles, but it's nice to see them make the transition into 3D World. But after that, it's back to Captain Toad. Now, while this is the first time you'll be able to play as Captain Toad in a game, it's technically his 3rd appearance after showing up in the Galaxy games, where he was originally known as the Toad Brigade Captain. His stages here are a bit more unique, offering a bit of a fun puzzle element in a 3D space, which to me always felt like a bit of an evolution of the types of puzzle games that we saw with the early Mario vs. Donkey Kong titles on the Game Boy. Then obviously, as many of you will know, Captain Toad ended up getting his own game, which further evolved and delved deeper into this gameplay style. Perhaps one day in the not too distant future, I'll make a Captain Toad treasure tracker video. But simply put, the way this works is you're limited on the movement that you can make. Toad can't jump, so you have to find a way to utilize the stage as well as the camera angles to grab all 5 green stars. And the first stage is obviously fairly straightforward. And once we're done with the Toad escapades, we make it to the World 1-Castle, Bowser's Highway Showdown. Similar to Super Mario 3D Land as well as many other games prior to this, you get a fun little animation of your character running through the Bowser door, and you're met with a darker tonal shift both in the appearance of the stage as well as the music. The gimmick at the start of this Bowser Castle are these bombs that look like soccer balls, which obviously you're meant to kick back at the opponents along your way. Early on, you'll notice a giant green loop that's shaped like a star. By grabbing that, it'll lay out 8 green coins for you to collect, and if you collect them quick enough, you'll be awarded with the first green star. As you move along, you'll find a cat switch you can use to make a vertical path for you to traverse. And on the top of said path is the second green star, but even more interesting is down below there are some gray bricks that you cannot damage on your own, instead you need to hit the soccer ball at them. And doing so will reveal the stamp. And just beyond that, you'll find a stack of Goombas where on the top of their heads is the third green star. It's a pretty quick and inoffensive stage, and after blowing up a set of brick walls that'll take you to the final warp block, you'll be able to take on Bowser. As you'd expect, since you've been running through the stage the entire time knocking bombs that look like soccer balls out of the way, that's the whole gimmick of the final fight. Bowser will throw soccer bombs at you, you swing it back at him, he might spit some fire on the ground, the usual stuff. But it should be simple enough for you to destroy him, run to the final flag, and free one of these Sprixies. I guess I technically didn't go through the plot of this game, but it's because it's a very thin plot. Everything you saw in the opening cutscene kind of explains it. There are these Sprixies that were kidnapped by Bowser, and you gotta save them. They have some magical powers, so Bowser wanted to kidnap them so he can make Bowser Land, and we can talk about that once we get to the final world. But either way, this frees the first Sprixie, you've completed the first world, you've gone through a thorough introduction of this game with a few different types of stages and gimmicks along the way. As far as World 1s go, or introductory levels in 3D Mario titles, I wouldn't say this is overachieving anything, but at the same time, it's not the worst way to start off the adventure. In fact, I think it sets the tone fairly well. You very quickly realize that if you're just looking for a simple adventure where you're running to the flagpole at the end of the stage, this is not going to provide too much of a challenge, especially in the early game. But with a few key moments along the way, maybe one every stage or two, a player can and will quickly realize that there are some well-hidden MacGuffins along the way, especially if this is the first level, because if there's already a little bit of a challenge early on in the game, it should hopefully make the search and discovery more exciting as a player goes through the adventure. And with that being said, we can run through the clear pipe that spawns and head over straight to the desert lands of World 2. The second world in a Mario game taking place in a desert isn't exactly a foreign concept. Super Mario Bros. 2, released in the United States back in 1988, was the earliest Mario game to have a desert as the second world. And this continued in Super Mario Bros. 3, where World 2 was the desert land. Fast forward, and when the new Super Mario Bros. Series started to release, once again the World 2 would normally be desert themed. Heck, even with the release of Mario Odyssey, the second main kingdom in the game, once you get past the introduction, is the Sand Kingdom, Toast Arena. So Mario 3D World, going straight from the green grasslands into the desert world, is par for the course as far as Mario games are concerned. And it starts off in World 2-1, Conch Door Canyon. For those that are unaware, the Conch Door is the silly-looking ostrich with sunglasses enemy in this game, and this was actually their inaugural appearance. Defeating them, especially if you have a catsuit, is pretty simple because you can just give them a whack, and likewise with said catsuit, right at the beginning of the stage you can climb a wall and grab the first green star. Moments throughout this game kind of hint you towards searching hidden nooks and crannies, where a curious player might wonder if a discolored block in the wall, for example, leads to something else. And oftentimes, if that curiosity gets the best of them, they'll be rewarded with a special secret. In this case, it's a golden pipe that takes you into a bonus room where you can just collect a bunch of coins. Outside of that, it's a fairly straightforward level, with few alternate routes or hidden areas that players can search. But it doesn't mean there's no challenge, as the Conch Doors will make sure to try to smack you every chance they can. However, you can use the conch door to your advantage. By luring one into slamming their head into the gray bricks that surround it, it will unveil the second green star. And just beyond that conch door, you'll find Captain Toad, and he will award you with yet another green star. He is technically off to the side and not on the main path, so you could easily pass by him without noticing, especially because the main path lures you not only with a stamp, but with a bit of a speed challenge in order to make it to the flagpole before the ground beneath you moves and you fall to your demise. But with everything collected, players can then grab a stamp from a hidden bonus area before moving on to World 2-2. Players might notice that the stage that's available to enter is actually World 2-3 and World 2-2 is locked just above it, with the only way to unlock said stage is by collecting enough green stars. So obviously if you're going for full completion as you head through the level, this won't be an issue, but for players just looking for a direct linear game heading straight to Bowser, this might actually be a world they don't even enter. Which is a shame because World 2-2 Puff Rod Peaks offers a very involved gimmick. Players are required to use either the touchscreen or their cursor to engage with the stage in various locations, forcing platforms to react and create a path for your character. For obvious reasons, this is a lot more fun and easier to pull off if you're playing with a touchscreen, as it could be a bit disorienting otherwise, but it's still very much accomplishable regardless of how you play it. It just might take a few tries to time things right. As you work your way up some bricks early on, trying to juggle tapping them as well as jumping before they move back into the wall, you'll be able to grab the first green star before moving on, which, again, without the touchscreen is a lot easier said than done. Eventually, you'll make it to another segment with hovering platforms and tiny Goombas chasing after you, which those tiny Goombas could really be a pain in the neck just like they've been in previous titles. But along your route, you'll find a cloud that'll take you up to the sky, with a typical sky-based bonus room that'll lead you to another green star. Moving beyond that, there will be some platforms that are hovering in the air that you have to tap on to make them come out of the wall, but players with a keen eye might notice that beyond the third one, there's a pathway downwards for a hovering platform, and of course, jumping beneath that will give them the third green star. And to, once again reiterate, doing so without a touchscreen can be a bit disorienting. Quite frankly, even trying to reach the top of the flagpole without a touchscreen can be a bit annoying. You'll notice that I skipped straight past the stamp in this stage, and it's because I actually couldn't find it the first time around. I spent quite a bit of time trying to search for it, finishing the stage 2 more times until I finally figured out where it was. And naturally, it's hidden at the very beginning of the level, by falling down into the hole below these platforms that we started the stage off with. And with the completion of World 2-2, we're done with the touchscreen gimmick, but now we get to experience a whole other gimmick, and one that I would consider as one of the most enjoyable gimmicks in this game, the Shadow Play Alley in World 2-3. Throughout the stage, there will be a bright light shining on your character, highlighting the shadows of your character, the enemies, and even coins in the background. In various moments throughout the stage, players are meant to use the shadows to figure out where things are hidden. So for example, early on you might notice that there's a star shadow, but there is no star along your path, and that's because you're supposed to run towards the screen away from the wall, and that'll unveil the first green star. As you move further along, eventually the player will actually completely disappear and be nothing more than a shadow on the wall, effectively making this just a 2D segment in the game, which is kind of a creative way to bring back the traditional style of control for a Mario title. The shadows in the wall are pretty distinguishable, so you know what you're grabbing and what's available. For example, early on you'll find a cat bell, and you'll notice the stamp shadow below the piranha, so you'll be able to charge right below the bricks and break them as you run through and grab the stamp. Once you grab that, you pass through the door, the character comes back onto the screen, you'll find a bonus room with a quick puzzle that will once again use this stage's shadow gimmick, fairly creatively I might add, in order to grab the second green star. Beyond that, players will be able to grab a piranha plant and run around while it eats the enemies along the way. Eventually you'll find a cowering Captain Toad with a giant Bowser shadow above him, and since Bowser's nowhere to be seen, you'll naturally run towards the screen yet again to find a fake Bowser silhouette in the background, or I guess technically it's the foreground, and with the relief of Captain Toad, he will reward you with the third green star before you're able to end the stage. With the third stage of World 2 completed, we'll be able to head on to really rolling hills. World 2-4 takes a break from the desert theme and throws you back into the grasslands. And this level is fairly iconic because in one of the earliest trailers of Super Mario 3D World, this is the stage that was shown, famously involving the mice running on the rolling hills. I always felt like this was kind of just a better version of the first stage in the game, to be honest. It follows a lot of the same ideas, including the placement of walls that are just kind of begging you to traverse upwards, especially if you have the cat power-up. And naturally, just very early on, you'll be rewarded for your curiosity with the green star. And in general, it is a bright and cheerful stage and has many different paths that one could take as they advance through it, which means those that are curious and searching for everything they can in this game could potentially spend a lot of time running back and forth, whether it's because they decided to take the high route and get rewarded with a bunch of coins, or take the lower routes and grab some baseballs while searching for stars hidden beneath rolling hills. The funny thing is, either way, even if you run through the wall on the right as well, you will not find anything in that segment. Instead, once you move forward and jump through a pipe that'll take you underground, you'll be in a narrow corridor with upper routes and lower routes, with one of them that'll take you to a bonus room, where you'll have to light up every block on the floor to be rewarded the second green star. Surprisingly, despite how tight this corridor is, there are many different little pockets that you can search that most players would pass right by. For example, early on, a curious player might decide to traverse upwards on a wall, and the programmers know that some players will want to do this, so they will reward you with a stack of gold coins. Then just before the end of the stage, there's a segment with wheels that are rolling just below a bottomless pit. Then once again, if you're the curious type, you might think, I wonder if there's anything below these wheels. Then perhaps, not so surprising, there is, the third green star. Aside from that, early on in the beginning of the level, you do have to come back and revisit if you're not controlling Mario, because there's a button with an M on it, and hidden behind that button is a stamp. So if you're not using Mario, you'll have to re-enter the stage in order to do that and grab the stamp. But now that everything's collected in the stage, we can move on to the Mystery House. These are fun and quick bite-sized challenges. You'll have to complete them all one after the other in a single go, and if you fail, you'll start from the beginning. Now, given that this is the first one, there are only 5 challenges that you'll have to go through, and they're fairly straightforward. But as time goes on, and especially at the very end of the game, there will be a very difficult one that we'll have to get through in order to reach full completion, and we'll get to that when we get to that. After the Mystery House is completed, you'll need to take on this mini-boss in World 2-A, which is just basically bullying these giant big Galoombas. And doing so will grant you access to yet another stage with an interesting gimmick, one that is pretty popular, World 2-5, the Double Cherry Pass. Now, interestingly enough, and I mentioned this back when I was doing the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe video, the Double Cherry's conception comes from the result of a mistake made by a staff member with a placement tool which created 2-player Marios. And the staff thought it was such a good idea that they decided to implement it into the game. And I am glad they did. The Double Cherry power-up can be a lot of fun, and even more so when you're playing co-op with 2 or more players. But even as an individual, the multiplying of your character does offer a fun little dynamic, especially because there are segments that will require you to make sure your clones all survive in order to advance to a hidden area. So you'll have to get used to carefully platforming while making sure everybody's okay, which, depending on the stage and the challenge, can be easier said than done. Naturally, being the first time that we use this power-up, it's a lot simpler in this stage. You'll quickly be able to triple your character count, and even grab the first green star by breaking a crate just along the path. And since this power-up is stackable, when you grab a fire flower, you can just send out a barrage of bullets towards some enemies. At the end of this segment, you'll notice that there are 2 P-switches, which means you'll have to have at least 2 clones in order to activate them, and doing so will grant you the green star. So this kind of sets players up into the understanding that they may often need more than 1 clone if they want to grab everything. Moving on to the next segment of the stage, players will be able to grab a bunch of different cherries, and with stacking them with the fire flower, just unleash mayhem on the enemies and the platforms all around you. And as all of this is going on, with a keen eye, a player might notice that there are blocks that they can hit to create a platform that moves upwards, which allows you to grab the stamp before making it to the final segment, finding a platform with the number 4 on it, realizing that you need to have at least 4 of your characters in one piece, or of course be playing 4-player co-op in order to access the third green star. Once again, I'll reiterate that the challenge in this early stage is fairly straightforward, but as you move on throughout this game with this gimmick now introduced, they will find ways to make the survival of the clones a lot more difficult, which made me repeat a lot of these levels more than once in order to grab all of the collectibles along the way. But before we make it to those further challenges in the game, we have to defeat the second Bowser Castle, titled Bowser's Bullet Bill Brigade. The player will drop down to what I can best describe as a propaganda parade for Bowser's army. There are giant Bowser flags coming down a wall while tanks head towards you and bullets shoot out at you, effectively making the stage somewhat of an auto-scroller. Players will eventually get to blocks that effectively allows them to shoot bullets at their enemies, which will help them in shooting some fire-breathing piranha plants that are protecting the first green star, and likewise in breaking a wooden crate that contains the second star. You also might notice that while the bullets do fire out automatically from this cannon that you're wearing on your head, you could hold the button to charge up the shot to make the cannon stronger, and that could be useful to destroy larger blocks or defeat more enemies. As you move through the stage, eventually you'll find a stamp that you have to grab quickly before it moves off the screen, but if you make it towards the end of the level, there will be a wall with a picture of Bowser on it with some cracks in it, and if you don't have the cannon to blast open that wall, you'll actually have to repeat the stage altogether, which is what happened with me. So effectively, to actually complete the stage fully, you'll need to make sure you do not lose the cannon, otherwise you can't burst open that wall and grab the third green star, making the stage just that little bit more exciting. But once that's all said and done, you can take on the boss fight, which is not Bowser this time, it's a fight against Boom Boom. Now, on one hand, doing this a bunch of times in the previous Mario 3D Land made this very underwhelming and kind of lame. On the other hand, I did appreciate the jump in visuals from the 3DS to the Wii U, or for the Switch in this case, since the 3DS visuals were still fresh in my mind. And as an added bonus, Boom Boom will become invisible every now and then to kind of make it a bit more unique. But in my opinion, this is way too simple of a boss fight for a final Bowser Castle in a specific world. Especially because, well, if you have the Fire Flower, you can completely cheese the fight. Once that's all taken care of, we jump to the top of the flagpole, the next Sprixie is saved, and World 2 of Mario 3D World is fully complete. And while these desert stages just added the tiniest bit of challenge into the game in comparison to World 1, they did add quite a few memorable gimmicks that would reappear as the game goes on. I think the second world, just like in many previous Mario titles, more or less feels like an extension of the first world of the game. It is still very much an introduction to this adventure and should be treated as such. The hand-holding is still there, but it's loosening up just the slightest bit. And naturally, as you'd expect with progression of this title, that hand-holding will loosen up more as you continue, especially as we head towards the snow-themed stages of World 3. I find World 3 to be one of the most memorable worlds in this game, and it's for a number of reasons. For starters, it's about the point in time where players will find themselves repeating challenges and stages over and over again, especially if they're trying to collect all the MacGuffins. I also really like the aesthetics, and I feel like the level design here is a lot more memorable than the worlds that came before, and this might be pretty generic, but the whole ice skating thing always sticks out in my memory. It's kind of like that boot power-up in Super Mario Bros. 3. Even though that shoe power-up only showed up in a specific moment in Super Mario Bros. 3, I remember as a child thinking it was one of the most memorable things about the game. And likewise, the ice skates in Mario 3D World leave that same type of impression, especially because, well, it kind of reappears again in the Mario Party titles. But that's not all World 3 has to offer. It also houses the first Ghost stage, a level that takes place in the sky, and even a stage inspired by Mario Kart. The uniqueness in the different levels in this world alone make it feel like it's truly the start of the game, where the previous two worlds were kind of just the warm-up. But it all starts off in World 3-1 Snowball Park. In addition to the snow theme, the stage also houses the propeller hat, which makes its reappearance after showing up in a few games prior to this one, although it's not really all that necessary to use in the stage. Right off the bat in the very beginning, there's the first green star hidden in an alcove, and after taking part in some ice skating segments against some Goombas, players will find the second green star by chasing a bunny rabbit along your way. Likewise, along your path, you'll find a stamp just off to the side that will require careful traversal across a narrow pathway to grab. And just beyond that, off the top of the screen, if a player was curious enough to climb the tree, assuming they do not have the propeller hat anymore, with a well-timed wall jump and a peach hover, they'll be able to grab the third green star and head to the end of the stage. In order to access World 3-2, you'll have to use the amount of green stars that you've collected to unlock it, and it will give you access to the chain link charge. The gimmick of this stage is that it's an auto-scroller with a bunch of chain link fences that are rising and dropping as you move along. It's a fairly narrow path without much for searching. Rather, the player's wall jumping and platforming will be put to the test. Naturally, this is the kind of stage where players will do much better if they have the catsuit power-up, which players will be able to grab pretty much as soon as they start the stage. As players make their way through the entry point of the level, they'll be able to grab the first green star, and just beyond that, they'll make it to the warp block, which will take them to the next segment of the stage, but they'll have to be a bit patient because the green star is just beyond that warp block. After that's collected, then they can move on to the checkpoint. and at this point in time, the camera will start to pan upwards instead. Everything starts to move a bit quicker, and it can be a bit challenging, especially for newcomers of the franchise, making the stage a little bit more exciting than some of the earlier ones. I mean, even me with all of my Mario experience, I probably lost 3 lives just to make sure I can grab the first 2 green stars before making it to this point. Especially because you have to have held the catsuit power up for this long in order to not only grab the stamp along your way, but the 3rd green star. Beyond that, it is a straight shot towards the end of the stage, but it's not necessarily a simple straight shot. The quick auto-scrolling nature of the stage will make this a little bit more difficult than you'd expect. It was actually at this point in time where the invincibility Tanuki suit showed up for me, and similar to my previous playthrough in Mario 3D Land, since I've already 100% completed this game before, and I needed footage for the invincibility leaf anyway, I took this as the opportune moment to use said invincibility leaf, so I can get footage from it for this retrospective. I know, how could I even call myself a Mario fan at this point? I also almost screwed myself over because you need the catsuit power up at the end of the stage in order to reach the top of the flagpole, but since I did have the Tanuki leaf and there was a tree nearby, I was able to improvise. And honestly, just the fact that the invincibility leaf did show up in this stage kind of shows that the game does start to get a bit more serious by this point in time. And that's only made even clearer with the next stage, World 3-3, the Shifty Boo Mansion. Longtime viewers of my retrospectives will know that I generally love ghost stages, and the ghost-themed stages in this game are no exception. The puzzle elements required in order to make sure you advance through the end of the stage, while also trying to collect all of the stars and the stamp along your path, make it just that little bit more exciting to go through the search and use your critical thinking skills to figure out where everything is. And I will just flat out suggest that if a player was yet to use a guide by this point to figure out where any of the collectible MacGuffins are, this will very likely be the first moment where they decide that they need one. I actually made it to the end of the stage the first time without grabbing a single green star or the stamp. I didn't even see them along my way. So I had to do it all over again, only this time with a much more keen eye. First up is the stamp. Along your way as you run through the first hallway, there will be a couch off to the side. Jumping on that couch will cause it to ride up, and it'll take you straight to the stamp. And just right to the left of that, as an homage to Super Mario 64, you can jump into the Boo painting onto the wall, where you will be in a rotating room and have 10 seconds to grab the green star there. It's not hard to realize how I missed both of these the first time around. Next up, when I made it to the area of the bookshelves, you notice that the bookshelves start to slide in and out of the wall as you advance through them, and by jumping around said bookshelf, it'll eventually expose the 2nd green star. And it's not on the path, you actually have to go all the way to the left side in order to figure it out. Again, this is very well hidden, and most players won't even think to do that, so likely this will end up being a star that you have to look up. Or rather, you'll have to spend quite a bit of time searching if you're somebody that refuses to use a guide. And finally, now that people know that sitting on a couch is an interactable set piece, you'll find one prior to the end of the stage that'll take you up to a green pipe, except when you try to jump into that green pipe, it will just turn into the 3rd green star. This is kind of a common occurrence as you go through the ghost stages in this game, including when you make it to the flagpole where you jump into it and it just disappears. The real flagpole is just beyond it. And of course, this will happen again in future ghost stages. And with the Ghost Mansion complete, you'll be able to move on to Pretty Plaza Panic World 3-4. As soon as you jump in, you'll realize this stage's gimmick is that it has only a 100-second time limit. It's the type of challenge that we've seen in previous titles, including 3D Land and the Galaxy games, where your objective is going to be to run through the stage as fast as you can, but of course you still have to grab the collectibles along your way. Honestly, the hardest one for me to find was the first green star. It was actually the last thing that I found before completing the stage, and it's because as soon as you start the stage, it's located just behind you. The second one is easy enough. Along your path, you'll find a glowing green bunny rabbit that you have to chase in order to grab it. There's a switch off to the left as you move beyond that has a crown on it, so you'll need to be controlling Peach in order to get that one. And the third one, once again, is fairly simple, just along your path. You jump into the cloud and it takes you up to the sky bonus room where you can grab the green star there. This stage is very reminiscent of Mario 3D Land. It's small, it requires you to be quick, and nothing is that much of a mystery, except for maybe the first green star. And the test is more about being able to get through it as quick as possible, instead of actually being able to find what you're looking for. With that completed, you can grab another stamp from the bonus room in the overworld, and head over to the warp pipe for the next Captain Toad stage. And this Captain Toad stage, in my opinion, is a lot more exciting than the previous one, because you'll have to actually plan your traversal and how you maneuver around the level in order to grab every single green star. Especially because eventually you will have to raise the water level up in order to complete everything, which means if players got to that point before collecting all the earlier ones, they'll have to start over. But after that is accomplished, you get to World 3A, which is another blockade, only this time it's a fight against a Magic Koopa. And similar to the Charging Chucks and the Galoombas before, it's all a matter of just defeating the enemies fairly quickly, grabbing the green star, and moving on to the next portion of the world, which will see you access World 3-5, the Pipeline Lagoon. I just love the visual of the start of the stage with 3 Goombas hanging out in the oasis. It doesn't really add much to the game from a platforming angle or even a level design angle, but it is a fun and memorable aesthetic. This stage is kind of a semi-water level in that it takes place partially underwater and above ground as well. There will be moments where the water level rises and falls, and sure enough, in one of the earlier ones you'll be able to grab the first green star. After that, there's a neat little automated segment where you're going through the clear pipes. You can change directions to grab some stopwatches along the way, but what's cooler is the visual in the background of the sunken ships. After that visual treat, you can grab a fire flower and advance through the stage. But you gotta keep a keen eye open because there are some moments where you can actually just swim straight through the wall without realizing it. One of which will not only give you access to the stamp, but also give you access to a projectile block. Then naturally, with that power-up grabbed, you'll want to keep your eyes open for destructible terrain. And if you find it, and you should quickly find it just off to the left, you'll be able to access the second green star and a whole bunch of golden coins. But keep that projectile, because it's going to be very useful against all the pufferfish. And again, if you notice indentations in the wall, it's usually a good idea to swim close to it to see if you can go through it, and sure enough, that will lead you to the third green star, as well as access to the finish line. Just beyond that is World 3-6, Mount Must Dash. This is fun. It's a stage that's completely inspired by Mario Kart. You'll be running through speed dashes, timing jumps, avoiding enemies, making the right moves to take the correct alternate paths to grab green stars along your way. Eventually, you'll make it to a giant slide and head over to the next segment of the stage where you'll be running upwards. But in a very quick blink and you'll miss it fashion, you gotta drop down to get into the warp block, so you can head into a quick bonus room where you need to capture a bunny rabbit in order to get the second green star. And likewise, the stamp will be just beyond that, requiring you to quickly time a jump off of a springboard in order to access it. However, it is the third green star that will provide the hardest challenge. As you're sliding down nearing the end of the stage, you'll have to bounce off of the springboard at exactly the right time so you can jump high enough in order to reach the green star. And I actually could not pull this off with Luigi. I had to finish the stage and come back and do it again. Only this time I needed to make sure that I still had the cat suit by the end of the level because you need to climb up the wall in order to grab that green star. Fortunately, it is a fun stage and it does not take all that much time to repeat, so I didn't mind doing it again. Now you'd think it would be time for the Bowser Castle at this point, but unlike in the previous levels, there's a 7th stage in this world. 3-7, Switchboard Falls. And it's the return of the gimmick with the platform that you have to step either forwards or backwards to get it to move in the direction you want it to go. And the stage does kind of warm you up a bit by allowing you to make a few mistakes early on before they decide to throw you over the bottomless pit. In addition to controlling the platform forwards or backwards, you'll also have to activate some switches to get the track to change in the direction you want it to go, which obviously is not all that new to the series. In fact, it's pretty old. I remember doing this as early as Super Mario World and perhaps even prior to that. As you move through the stage, eventually you'll make it to a green pipe which will drop you down a long chute. And by following the trail of rings, you'll be able to grab the green star before exiting this area. Shortly after that, it'll just be a lot more challenges involving the platforms as well as the switches in order to change the tracks. The third green star and the stamp will appear along your path in the same area as long as you move the platform to the end of the track so that it can overlap far enough in order to grab those collectibles. But it is the second green star that gave me the most challenge and required me to redo the stage. And that's because it's pretty well hidden. When you drop down into this platform and you're supposed to move up ahead, if you go backwards instead and crouch, it takes you to the second green star. And with all that said and done, this time the Bowser stage is a train, the Bullet Bill Express. The first green star just requires you to jump up there as fast as you can and grab it before you move on, because once again this is an auto-scroller. And once again, you'll also have a projectile block, which will help you grab the second green star by shooting the stack of Goombas ahead of you. All the while, there are bullet bills across the map just firing everything at you. Fortunately, however, you can grab a Mega Mushroom fairly early on before the Bonsai Bills start to fire at you. As you continue to the end of the stage before you exit, you might notice a hidden enemy just down below. If you jump down there and defeat him, you'll be able to grab the stamp. But before that, and I had to repeat the stage in order to find this, probably because I destroyed it with the Mega Mushroom the first time around, there's a green pipe that you'll pass by on the bottom of the stage which will take you towards the side where the Bonsai Bills are being fired from. And if you bust the crate open just in front of you, a Captain Toad will be there to reward you with a green star. Finally, making it towards the end of the level is a fight against Pom Pom, which is more or less just as underwhelming as the Boom Boom fight. They try to make it a little bit more enticing by having decoys, but they're not really all that hard to figure out which one the real one is. I actually think some of the Pom Pom fights in Mario 3D Land were a lot more difficult than this one. Now, that being said, with World 3 done, you'd think you'd be able to move on to World 4. That would be the natural progression of things. Except once you run through that pipe, that has kind of a stopgap. And before moving on to World 4, you have to jump into World 3-B, which is a boss fight. Then this more than makes up for the fight against Pom Pom. And the level is titled A Banquet with the Histocrat, which is a fight against a giant snake. And you better hope that you have a catsuit for this one. They will give you a bell before heading to the fight, so hopefully you can keep hold of it for as long as possible. Your goal is to use the smaller snakes in order to climb up and jump onto the head of the larger snake. A few of the snakes could disappear, some of them will not have a saucer on top of their head, and if you accidentally climb up those, they'll bite at you. It's not the most challenging boss fight. Not yet. It will show up again later. But it does feel like a real boss fight, unlike Boom Boom and Pom Pom before. Sometimes it's just about the spectacle for the occasion. Especially because I think World 3 needed that kind of spectacle. It was a much more enjoyable world to run through, largely because of the challenge that's in the stages, the variety in the level designs, as well as the gimmicks, and the challenge that it offered. It finally felt like the game had taken off its training wheels. And if there's one thing that I can really praise this game for, it's the difficulty curve. Because in the prior game, Mario 3D Land, you pretty much had to run through a very simple first 6, maybe even 8 worlds until it finally picked up and started to feel like a challenge. Over here, instead, it feels like it gets progressively more difficult as you run through the game, and that's the way it should be. And I will be able to delve a little bit deeper into that as we head over to the canyons of World 4. I personally knew that World 4 was a bit more exciting because it was at this point in time where I started to notice that I would effectively go out of my way to choose Peach. It didn't happen immediately, it took me a few lives in the first world until I decided to make that decision. But by this point in time, I found the speed advantage with Toad, for example, to be completely useless because anytime I used him, I would just fall off the stage. That extra hover that Peach provided proved invaluable, and while I didn't necessarily use her for the remainder of the game, I did go back to her quite a bit, including as I went through World 4-1, Ant Trooper Hill. The stage is filled with, as you'd expect, a bunch of ants, but the gimmick with these ants is that you can actually bounce off of their heads. And in many areas throughout the stage, you'll actually need to bounce off of them in order to survive. You could still defeat them, as well as spiked variants of them by swinging your tail, assuming you have the catsuit power-up, but otherwise there will be many segments throughout the stage where you actually can't reach an area you want to get to unless you jump on their heads. Early on, as you run through a tunnel, for example, you'll have to defeat a few of them in order to grab the stamp that's above, and that will be much easier done if you have the catsuit power-up. And just beyond that, and I missed this the first time, you'll have to climb the wall before moving on to the checkpoint flag if you want to grab a green star. But once you do get to that checkpoint, this is where it gets just a little bit more difficult. The giant ants start to make an appearance, and effectively you need to ride them in order to get through the stage. It was basically at this point in time where I figured, yeah, I need to use Peach. Toad's verticality was not very effective, and his speed actually made him harder to control. That being said, early on I was able to grab the second green star by entering a bonus warp pipe on my path, and likewise I was able to bounce on another green ant just long enough to grab the third green star. But actually finishing the stage did require me to come back in with Peach. I struggled to even hit the top of the flagpole without her. Could this be a skill issue? Perhaps. But I have noticed a pattern that when I start to lose lives in these games, it's generally when I really start to enjoy them. Maybe that's why I've been enjoying Super Meat Boy 3D so much. In any case, there are some shortcuts you can make to make the stage a little bit more tolerable. For example, a well-timed long jump over here will allow you to skip a small portion of the stage. But other than that, it's all about being able to bounce comfortably on top of the ants, and that's much more doable when you have Peach. Now, as a little bit of a side note, I always found this was neat. When you do complete the stage, you can enter a green warp pipe, and it won't necessarily give you access to anything really all that relevant or special, but it will give you a visual of the world that's up ahead, since you can't really run the entire area until you beat certain levels along the way. And maybe it was the fact that this game came out in the early 2010s and Nintendo really took their time getting into the HD era, but for some reason I would appreciate when we get visuals like this. But that being said, with that out of the way, you can head to World 4-2, the Piranha Creeper Creek. The stage is filled with, as you'd expect, these creeping piranha plants. They extend from the walls, and in order to get rid of them, you either gotta bounce on their heads or you gotta do a proper timed ground pound to get rid of them entirely with one shot. and they can be a bit of a pain to navigate. Especially because if you mistime a jump, you take a hit, and if you are already small, you can lose a life. Along the way, you'll pass by a bonus room where you gotta bounce on a few of them in a row in order to reach the first green star, and just beyond that, you have to defeat a few of them to get them out of the way so you can swim down a creek in order to grab the second green star. And likewise, just beyond that, if you're keeping your eyes pierced, you might notice that you can jump just behind one of these piranha plants in a segment that you're meant to jump down into the water and swim through the stage, and in doing so, you'll be rewarded with a bunch of coins, but also a stamp. It is also much easier to get through the level in general by finding this secret, because if you swim down below, you're going to have to shoot a bunch of the creeping piranha plants out of the way to advance, and that is obviously made a lot easier if you have a fire flower. Now, the final segment is not necessarily the hardest challenge, but it does get a little bit more difficult. You're jumping through moving platforms and dodging piranha plants along your way, and just below you is a giant pool of toxic waste, so you can't really make too many mistakes. I did lose a life here. It wasn't the most difficult challenge in the world, but it's also just an introduction to this type of stage because later on, this will provide you with more of a challenge. Mind you, in order to grab the third green star, you're going to have to jump through a green star ring in order to spawn 8 green coins and collect all of those coins so you can get the final star. And once that's done, you need to reach the top of the flagpole by using the sleeping piranha plant along the way. And doing so will give you access to level 3-A, which is yet another blockade. A fight against the boulders. A bunch of rocks that you're basically just gonna wait for them to roll up into a ball and grab them and throw them into the lava. After that's all said and done, you can head over to Beat Block Skyway. This is another returning gimmick that we've seen from the previous titles, and it's made just a bit more exciting with the double cherry power-up. By following the rhythm of the music in the background, you'll know when the blocks are going to make their shift, and as we saw in the previous stages that involve the double cherry, you'll want to make sure you keep some clones around if you're trying to access every part of the stage. You can collect the first green star by avoiding a boomerang bro while heading over the blocks that are disappearing while it's blue. But as you move on to the next section, you'll quickly get to the halfway point of the stage and realize you need 4 clones in order to access the secret area. So of course, for me that meant at least one more repeat of the stage. Before heading over to the final slide which closes off the end of the stage, players will be able to head into a warp pipe which will enter a bonus room where they have to quickly collect all of the blue coins if they want the green star. Now, similar to the situation with the ants in the previous stage, I did struggle with the slide challenge while using Luigi, and I stubbornly refused to change characters this time around, so I lost quite a few lives. Fortunately, however, eventually with both of my clones surviving, I was able to activate the pair of switches so I can get the third green star and move on to the next stage. Well, after I repeated the level a second time so I can grab the stamp with Peach. Which surprisingly, it was more difficult than I expected to keep 4 versions of Peach alive to get to that point in the level, having to intentionally restart the level about 4 times until I was finally able to accomplish the task. And the funny thing is, even after that, I lost all 4 of them with an easy jump just by being foolish. But on the plus side, I did not have to restart anything because I had all the collectibles now and they don't disappear once you lose a life. So I headed over to the end of the stage, grabbed the top of the flagpole, and moved on. That difficulty curve was really starting to make its presence known. After that, we head over to World 4-4, the Big Bounce Byway. The gimmick for this green grassland themed stage is a bunch of bouncing mushrooms that you can use to spring upwards. So naturally, there's a lot of verticality in the stage, and naturally, at this point, I didn't even bother trying to do randomizing the characters, I just stuck with Peach, making it a lot easier to advance. The first green star is along your path, but you'll have to defeat a bunch of enemies that look like springboards, and the catch is that when you defeat one of them, they actually do turn into a springboard, and you gotta take that to grab the green star. After that, you'll be bouncing over mushrooms, this time over a bottomless pit, and eventually, I realized this actually after a few lives, that same springboard is required to be collected and taken with you as you bounce over those giant mushrooms, because you're gonna need it to bounce high enough in order to grab the second green star. Following that is a bonus room which will once again require you to use a springboard to access the third green star, before you travel on a very large bouncing mushroom, while dodging these bitty buds and collecting the stamp before heading to the end of the stage. While this level is not necessarily as difficult as some of the other ones in this world, that second star that requires the use of carrying the springboard, or perhaps revisiting the stage with a catsuit so you can traverse up the wall, does make it fit in with the rest of this comparatively more challenging world. I mean, gosh, even at the very end, if you want to reach the top of the flagpole, you have to once again defeat the springboard that's ahead of you and use that to bounce high enough in order to grab the peak, which of course is necessary if you're going for full completion. And with that accomplished, we can head into our second Mystery House Mad Dash, only this time instead of only 5 green stars to collect, there are 10. So that is 10 quick bite-sized challenges to collect 10 green stars that have to be completed in a single go. And while these 10 challenges are slightly more difficult than the ones that we saw in the previous Mystery House, I would say they are far from unbeatable. I lost about 4 lives here, and most of those were in the first half of the challenges, so it didn't feel like I had to repeat way too much of it. Although I did lose a life after collecting the 8th star, so that was kind of annoying because I had to do the first 7 all over again after doing that. But by that point, I had already mastered all of them enough where it was easy enough to run back through it and complete everything. Now mind you, if you're not going for full completion, these mystery houses, while optional, are very useful because those 10 green stars we just grabbed from going through that will make up for players that are not really going through the deep search to find all of the hidden green stars that are not directly along their path. So it does help with progression when you get to stages that you can't unlock unless you have enough green stars, effectively offering players alternative methods that won't require backtracking if they want to play through most of the levels in this game, which I think is commendable because not everybody likes to go for full completion and not everybody likes to go back and revisit older stages. But it's also commendable because the challenges themselves are fun. You're not simply just being gifted green stars for the sake of gifting them. You're actually spending almost as long on these as you would in a regular stage, especially if you make a mistake nearing the end of it. Of course, I only speak positively about this right now because we're not at the end of the game yet, where one of these mystery mad dash bonus stages are really going to put you through the ringer, but in the meantime, we do not need to worry about that. However, what we do need to worry about is World 4-5, Spike's Lost City. So right off the bat, I gotta give a shout out to the aesthetics here. I love the rustic, ancient ruin visuals that they're going for here, partially because it's unique and it hasn't really been done before to this extent in the Mario franchise, but also because, quite frankly, it just looks nice. The stage is also naturally properly named because it's filled with a bunch of spikes, both the enemy character Spike as well as rolling spike logs which they're throwing at you. Sadly, however, there is no Foreman Spike cameo. You'll have to watch the movie for that, or talk to Sebastian Maniscalco. Anyway, early on in the stage, you'll be able to collect a Super Bell which will give you access up a wall that's right next to you, and running to the end of that wall will let you grab the first stamp, followed by entering a warp pipe which will take you to a bonus room where you have to hit every one of the switches on the floor while dodging the rolling spikes in order to grab the first green star. After that, pretty quickly actually, is the checkpoint of the stage. As you go through the stage, there will be more rolling spikes to dodge, and some of them will be on swinging platforms, as well as some steep hills that you'll have to run upwards while avoiding the rolling logs that the spikes are launching at you. And all of this has to be done while trying to make sure you can keep hold of a Super Bell power-up, which can be granted if you're careful while trying to grab the red coins on the steep hill, because that will allow you to climb the wall up the left side where you can grab the second green star, and the third green star is just beyond that on more swinging platforms. Finally, with that all done and only a few lives lost, you'll be able to head to the end of the stage. Now technically at this point you can head straight to the Bowser Castle and finish off the world, but there is a warp pipe available that will take you to a hidden area. And over there you will find the Fire Bros hideout number 1, stage 4-B. It's a quick blockade, you just gotta defeat the 3 Fire Bros to get out of there and grab the green star, and doing so will spawn a bonus room where you can collect another stamp. And now with that all done, we can head to the final Bowser Castle of this world, the Lava Rock Lair. Dare I say this is the first Bowser Castle that actually feels like a Bowser Castle in that it takes place in a volcano, or what appears to be one anyway. You start off trying to avoid the boulders that are going at you, and assuming you're not playing in co-op, you're gonna need to grab a boulder and put him down on a switch while going to stand on the other switch so you can access the first green star. Moving on from there, there's a minor challenge where you gotta collect the red coins in order to get the Super Bell power-up, which will be invaluable for the stage. And after heading through a clear pipe, you can access a bonus room, which you'll need to once again throw the boulders on top of the 2 switches and then jump on the 3rd switch yourself so you can collect the second green star. Something that I actually failed to do, so I jumped into the lava and started over. Now creatively, in order to grab the 3rd green star, you actually have to use the boulder and just launch it off of the edge of the platform to the left so it can grab the 3rd green star for you. I didn't realize this initially, I thought I'd have to use Peach to grab it, but this is much better, I think. But prior to even heading into that segment, hopefully you've held on to the Super Bell long enough, because if you climb the wall onto the left, that will give you access to the stamp. I'd say for a stage that's as small as this one is, because most of the focus will be on the final boss fight, they do a fairly decent job requiring you to either use some critical thinking skills, or just general platforming while avoiding taking damage, in order to grab all of the collectibles in this short stage. But once you get to the boss fight, it gets a little bit more exciting. You're facing a giant and you need to throw the smaller boulders at it, and this is made much easier if you actually do have the cat suit, because it allows you to quickly smack those boulders while they're rolling towards you and pick them up. Otherwise, you'll need to be a little bit more careful in your timing when you're trying to jump on these guys. Either way, after the trademark 3 hits, you'll be able to head to the flagpole, jump to the top of it, and you'll be done with the challenge that is World 4. It was pretty beefy, it was fairly challenging. While World 3 took me about an hour to get through, and keep in mind World 1 and 2 together took me about an hour and a half, World 4 on its own took me about an hour and 15 minutes, and it's not because there are more stages, it's because it's getting harder. Not only are the actual levels getting harder, but the ability to collect everything on your way is getting harder. Either because it takes more effort to find where everything is, or the platforming is just getting more difficult, so you're losing a lot more lives. Like I said in the previous segment, this game has a pretty good difficulty curve, and I think the length of time that it takes to complete each world kind of reflects that. It gets harder, it gets longer, but the stages are roughly the same amount, which means, for me anyways, I'm losing a lot more lives or spending a lot more time searching. But we're not done yet, not even close. That's only 4 worlds so far. And putting the canyons of World 4 behind us, we can head over to the purple beach-like island that is World 5. I always like a good tropical theme in a Mario game. It gives me those sunshine vibes. In fairness, I think World 5 only actually has a single beach-themed level, but there are some unique set pieces, including a Captain Toad stage that's ghost themed, that doesn't exist anywhere else, and the return of the dessert theme, something that we saw starting back in Mario Galaxy, and that stage also famously has a gimmick that is reminiscent of what we saw in Galaxy. But before we work our way over there, let's start with World 5-1, Sunshine Seaside, the actual beach-themed stage. Now, I don't know if this is necessarily intentional on the developer's end. Maybe it's my wishful thinking because this is an homage to Mario Sunshine. But the stage, perhaps more than almost every other stage in this game, is really an open sandbox. Both literally because you're walking around on sand, and the fact that it's not really a linear pathway. In fact, in addition to the 3 green stars and the stamp that you're collecting in every stage that you play in order to advance beyond this open sandbox that you start off in, there are actually 5 collectibles to grab. So it kind of has collectathon elements. Again, this could be entirely a reach, it might have nothing to do with Super Mario Sunshine, and it might not be remotely a callback to the non-linear collectathon stages of the earlier games. But to be fair, even back in Super Mario Galaxy, one of the only stages that was an open sandbox that was similar to Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine was also the Sunshine Beach theme of Beach Bowl Galaxy. And even in Super Mario Galaxy 2, we had the open sandbox of Starshine Beach Galaxy. And heck, in that one, they actually had Pianta statues. So maybe they do intentionally make the beach-themed stages a callback to Mario Sunshine by making them an open sandbox. Or, you know, I could just be reaching because I want this to be a thing. Either way, effectively, there are 9 things you're going to be collecting in this stage. Most of the keys that you have to grab are going to be along your path, either by climbing a tree, jumping beyond a group of enemies, swimming into a certain area, going through a clear pipe. The green stars and the stamp will be a little bit more discreetly hidden, however. For example, you'll have to bust open a giant Goomba sand sculpture in order to grab one of them. This is also the stage where the boomerang flower makes its first appearance in this game, and here's a bit of an interesting tidbit that you may have not known, in addition to what I discussed in my previous Mario 3D Land video, where I stated that the first time Mario had a boomerang power-up was technically with the e-reader stages back on the Game Boy Advance Super Mario Bros. 3, but the first time there was actually like a known boomerang flower power-up, which is what we know today as the modern boomerang flower, was in the previous title of Mario 3D Land, and its first appearance was in World 5-1 in Super Mario 3D Land, a desert-themed stage. And now its first appearance in Mario 3D World is also in World 5-1, which obviously doesn't mean too much, but I thought it was kind of cool. In any case, as you run through the stage and you grab all of the different keys along the way, which, like I said, are pretty easy to find, you'll find a little cave on the right side which you can jump into, and you can free Captain Toad and he'll give you another green star. And in this first main area before you leave it, if you swim off into the distance in the beach, you'll find a hidden warp pipe that you can take that'll go into a bonus room where you can get yet another green star. Now, the funny thing is, at this point, you'd think you'd be done, right? You went through this whole ordeal, you found the collectibles to unlock the warp pipe so you can access the next part of the stage, and the whole collectible aspect beach theme was the whole gimmick of the stage, at least you thought. But no, in actuality, once you take that warp block and you go past the checkpoint, you get to another section with Plessie, making her first appearance since World 1. There won't be much to collect this time around, so you won't have to spend your time searching different little hidden areas like we did the first time Plessy showed up. It's a lot more important to focus on the timing of your jumps and your placement throughout the trail, because you could easily fall off over here if you're not careful, especially over at the very end where you gotta make a few short hops in order to grab the stamp. But for the most part, this should be easy for you to get through and finish up the stage. And after that's all done, we can head straight into the Captain Toad stage titled Captain Toad Plays Peekaboo. So Captain Toad stages are already known to be just a little bit of a puzzle, and when you compound that with it being a ghost themed stage, it kicks it up just a notch. Another returning gimmick here is the little blocks that you have to interact with to get them to rise up or drop down when it's necessary. So naturally, once again, if you're playing without the touchscreen, this could be a little bit more annoying. But since this is not exactly a platforming stage, it's a lot easier to take care of that while you're playing. Either way, despite requiring you to use a little bit more of your critical thinking skills to get through this one, it's still pretty straightforward. And beyond that is World 5-2, the Tricky Trapeze Theater. This stage has the cool night rainbow party-like circus theme, and it takes place in a castle in the sky. You'll be doing a lot of swinging to advance and timing your jumps properly to avoid stage hazards as well as enemies along the way. The first screen star can be found while you're swinging if you notice that there are some invisible clouds that you can swing back to. And then just beyond that, when you get to the halfway point of the stage, there's a Mega Mushroom Challenge where you can just destroy a whole bunch of piranha plants, including giant ones. And off to the side of that area, there's a warp pipe you can take that enters a bonus room where you have to collect all of the blue coins in a timely fashion in order to get the second green star. As you advance from there, there's the stamp, which is technically hidden in clear sight, but because the color of the stamp kind of matches the color of the theme of the stage, I guess that was supposed to be the secret, that you're supposed to miss it. I don't know. I felt like it was right along the way, but I can understand what they were going for. After that is what I would say is the hardest challenge, especially because if you fail at it, you technically have to jump off the cliff and start the life over. While you're swinging around in the air, you need to go through one of those clear green loops that look like a star, and in doing so, you will spawn 8 green coins to collect. So you have to time your swings and your jumps and make sure you grab every single one of those coins before time runs out, which is a lot easier said than done. Now, it's not really impossible, it took me 3 tries to accomplish, but it's still memorable enough that I remember it was annoying. And perhaps even worse than that is at the very end, in order to reach the top of the flagpole, you have to jump off of the swing at the exact right time, which even when I tried with Peach, I wasn't accomplishing. So I did come back to this stage at a later time to grab the top of the flagpole by using a catsuit power-up, something that I effectively had not done throughout this entire game up until this point in time, deciding that I would come back to finish a stage later. But anyway, once that stage is complete, you can head over to World 5-3, the Backstreet Bustle. Now, technically, if a player did not care about collectibles, they could run through this one in like 20 seconds and be done with it. It's a very small stage. There's a 100-second timer and no clocks that you can grab to increase the time, but you probably won't need to. The big thing here is that you're going to need multiple cherry power-ups in order to grab all of the green stars. And you're also going to need Toad if you want to grab the stamp, so plan on returning to the stage again if you didn't see it the first time. Also, the first green star is pretty well hidden. I actually couldn't find it the first time around, which actually caused me to run out of time. But once I figured out how to get it, by ground pounding on a broken tile to the left of me, right where you start the stage, I realized it was a lot more obvious than I thought. Either way, due to the frantic fast nature of this stage, it'll probably require you to play it a few times until you grab everything. Kind of a tangent, but after playing through this stage, I unlocked a Toad house, and that's where I got a Super Bell, so I took advantage of that and went back to the previous trapeze stage. And I gotta say, while it was very useful to have the catsuit power-up in order to grab the top of the flagpole at the end of the stage, it was a lot harder than I expected to make sure I had that power-up through the entirety of that stage until the very end, which was its own challenge because every time I took a hit, I effectively had to exit the stage and start over. But anyway, after that it's the World 5-A blockade, which pits you up against a group of charging chucks, only this time there are many more charging chucks than what we faced earlier. And after defeating all of the Charleses, we can head over to World 5-4, the Sprawling Savannah. There's a sunset theme in this stage that makes it a bit more unique, so even though it's effectively a return of a few different gimmicks, the upward traversal, the green grassland, heck, even the ant troopers, it does make this stage a little bit more memorable. Especially as you're climbing the wall, you grab the first green star and head over to the next segment. That shot in the sky where you see the vast open grassland up ahead of you, I thought was another one of those moments where, again, in the context of being a Mario fan in the early 2010s, was visually very pleasing. When you take the massive pipe cannon and you head down to the vast open area, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't fun to just run around in this wide open area, especially if you're controlling Toad because you're really fast. Over here you get your share of bunnies to chase, one of which will obviously give you a green star. There are hills to ground pound and see what they reward you. You can use a Sprixie with binoculars to see what's coming up ahead. You can even fall down into an ant hole where you'll find a stamp. And once that's done, there's a bit of a, what I'll call a Donkey Kong barrel style challenge, made a bit easier if you're able to grab the invincibility star along your way. And just before the end of the stage, there's a little bit of a puzzle on a rotating platforms where you have to collect the 8 green coins in order to grab the final green star before jumping to the top of the flagpole. And with that completed, we can head over to 5-5, Bob-ombs Below. So obviously this stage is going to have a bunch of bob-ombs, but the below aspect of the stage just means it's underground. So it's got a theme that's similar to level 1-2. Early on in the stage, you'll find a POW block with a bunch of purple blocks behind it. Quickly hitting that POW block will give you access to the green star. Now, grabbing a Tanuki leaf will make this a lot easier, otherwise you will have to use the bomb to throw it at it. But in fairness, the stage does give you a Tanuki leaf almost immediately as soon as you start it, so I think most people are going to be using that. Anyway, as you move along from there, eventually you'll get to a giant circular platform where you can chase a bunny rabbit in a circle and grab the second green star, before using some bombs to blast open a pathway that's hidden into a wall that'll give you access to the stamp. And finally, just beyond that is a cloud power-up that'll shoot you up into the sky. Only this time it's not exactly what you'd expect. You're not simply just running through a long cloud where you can grab the green star at the very end of it. It's a huge 8-bit Mario that you have to light up and colorize, while of course avoiding some exploding hazards. And then once you get to the very end of the stage, by using a bomb, you're able to make a little pathway for you to get to the top of the platform and jump onto the top of the flagpole, which will then take us to the dessert theme of level 5-6, Cakewalk Flip. So after the last few 3D Mario games, you should know exactly how this works. You have these swinging platforms that switch between red and blue every time you jump, so it's all about timing where you're going and knowing where to land. The first green star will be hidden under one of the platforms, and it will actually swing with that platform, so you have to jump at the right time to make sure it's in the right spot when you want it. And as I advance through the stage while avoiding seismic waves that are trying to damage me and collecting some double cherries to increase my player count, eventually I made it to a warp pipe where I had to guide a ball into the right spot so I can grab the green star, and I did this by jumping to flip the platforms between red and blue at the right time, which I thought was a neat use of the gimmick. And after that is a pretty involved challenge for somebody that's just trying to grab the third green star. A combination of seismic waves, grabbing the green loop so you can get the 8 green coins, and timing the flips of the platform correctly so you can avoid falling down, it made the third green star a pretty difficult challenge. And what's even worse is you need your clone to survive to the end of the stage if you want to be able to grab the stamp. Or, you know, if you don't have the second clone, you can just do one of those things where you take the L and hover over with Peach and grab the stamp and fall to your demise. Yeah, this stage starts off very easy, it ends a lot more difficult than you'd expect. I did decide to grab the Tanuki suit this time around, because I am pathetic. And also because I had a giant retrospective to work on for this video game, so I did not have all the time in the world to sit there and redo this challenge over and over again. The Nintendine of 15 years ago would be very disappointed in me right now. And finally, after that is a lava castle theme of World 5-7. I'm not gonna lie, this one was hard. I think I relied on the golden Tanuki leaf again to grab all of the collectibles. So the first green star was actually very easy to miss. I didn't see it the first time around. As you're running through the initial barrage of bullet bills, you'll see a shadow on the floor, so you need to carry a springboard there and use that to reach it, while again avoiding the barrage of bullet bills. In the next segment, while you're being chased up against the wall, the stamp will be a lot easier to grab because it's right along your path. For the second green star, you'll want to lure those same bullet bills into slamming against the wall so you can access the bonus room. And you actually have to be pretty quick over here because if you're not, the bullet bills can destroy the platforms you're meant to take in order to grab that green star. And finally, the third green star can be found while you're traversing up the wall towards the end of the stage, hidden in between a bunch of indestructible blocks that only the bullet bills can destroy. With that out of the way, we can head to the actual final castle of this world, King Kathunk's Castle. Maneuvering through the stage will require you to have your character in the right spot so you don't get hit by the spikes. It also brings back that rustic theme that I really enjoyed from the previous world, only this time there's a bit of a purple fog and a darker theme to it. The first green star will show up and it'll require you to collect 8 green coins to grab, in a fairly simple yet quick time challenge. The stamp will show up when you get to a segment where a bunch of these spikes are coming out of the wall while you're avoiding charging chucks. You're meant to climb up the wall in order to grab the stamp before moving on. You honestly might not even notice the stamp is there if you don't plan on climbing the wall to search everywhere. And speaking of which, the green star will be stuck in between one of these spikes that are coming out of the wall just beyond that stamp. And finally, just before the final warp block, you might notice a ledge overhead. You gotta climb up the wall, so hopefully you have the Katsu power-up still, to get the final collectible of this stage before moving on to the boss fight. Quite frankly, I think this was the easiest stage in the entirety of World 5. And while the boss fight is more difficult than pretty much every boss fight that we've seen prior to this one, it's still a boss fight in Super Mario 3D World, which the general theme here is that they're pretty easy. So while the ending to this world was pretty difficult, I had to use 2 different invincibility leaves to grab everything, and many of the levels in World 5 either required me to search a whole bunch or to repeat a bunch of lives in order to grab everything. It once again made another world in this game very memorable because of the challenge that it provided, as well as some of the unique themes and stages that it had along the way. And just as you might expect, defeating this purple world will free the purple Sprixie, and in saying that out loud, I just realized that every Sprixie is colored based off of the world that it's in. I think it's kind of dumb that I didn't realize that earlier. But yeah, World 1, green grassland, green Sprixie. World 2, desert, yellow Sprixie. World 3, snow/ice, blue Sprixie. World 4, canyon, orange Sprixie. World 5, ocean beach Sprixie. The next one is the Sky City, and it's the light blue cyan Sprixie. And obviously the last one is going to be a red Sprixie because it's the lava theme world. Cool. Good job, Nintendo. Anyway, enough of that. With World 5 completed, we will now head over to the World 6 Sky City. Alright, we're gonna jump straight into this one because I love this world. Between all of the different type of stages and the challenges that you're gonna face, World 6 absolutely starts to feel like the start of the end game, or at the very least the end of the base game. Right off the bat with Clear Pipe Cruise, you get a stage with a fun gimmick where you have to control your character as they're swinging through the pipes. This includes making turns at the correct time, grabbing the right power-ups when you need them, whether that's an invincibility star or a fire flower, and all around quick thinking and reacting. For example, to grab the first green star, you're going to need to take the pipe, grab the invincibility star, and then circle back and use it in order to pass by the spikes to grab the green one. Moving on into the next segment, you can use a fire flower to attack some piranha plants that are along your way, and likewise you can use various turns that are along the path in the clear pipes to avoid fuzzies that will be blocking your route, allowing you time to effectively make an extra lap as they pass by. Doing so will grant you the second green star. As far as the third collectible is concerned, this is something that I completely missed and had to come back for. At about the halfway point of the stage when you get the checkpoint, there's a clear pipe that you can take onto the next segment. Now, if a player happens to have a Super Bell, which I didn't, so I came back to this one after completing a few levels, instead of traversing through the clear pipe, you're actually meant to run on top of it and climb up at around the halfway point where you can grab the stamp. I gotta say, it's pretty well hidden, and it's one of the more creative collectibles in this game. Aside from that, you need to work your way up the wall while avoiding spike balls. Using the POW block strategically, you can clear a path for yourself. And once you make your way up the wall, there's a warp block that takes you to the final segment, where once again, you have to make sure you have your fire flower so you can clear the spike balls out of the way, take the cloud up to the sky, and just unload fireballs onto the piranha plants as you grab the third green star. Now, the last segment can actually be a little tricky. You have to grab 5 key collectibles in order to unlock the warp block to take you to the end of the stage, and doing so will require careful traversal around the clear pipes while avoiding the fuzzies on your way. This isn't the most difficult challenge, but it is one that I had to repeat a couple of times, and the problem is because it is at the end of the stage and the checkpoint was pretty far back, I did waste quite a bit of time while getting back to it. It's really about remembering to time your turns away from the fuzzies, so you're not going around the pipes head on. It's one of those things where once you get the hang of it, it's really easy, but in the beginning you're just like, oh, I made another stupid mistake. In any case, once you do reach that warp block, it's pretty easy to make sure you hit the top of the flagpole. You just have to make sure you take the right route when you're in the clear pipe. With that all said and done, you can head over to World 6-2, the Spooky Seasick Wreck. Now, I like this stage because while it is technically a haunted theme or boo stage, however you want to call it, the setting is actually a lot more unique than that. It takes place in a sunken pirate ship, or rather a whole convoy of sunken pirate ships. Players are meant to work through the different ships while avoiding the bullying enemies, and even walking the plank where applicable to make sure they head to the secret areas. Pretty early on, you'll be granted a chance to grab a fire flower, which will help dealing with the enemies that are on your way instead of having to ground pound them every time. And actually, in order to grab the first green star, you gotta knock 2 of these guys off the cliff, so it's more useful than you'd expect. After that, you eventually take a warp block and that'll take you inside one of the ships. The stamp will be along your path, you just have to avoid the ghosts as you try to grab it. This is once again easier said than done because the water level rises and falls, so it's not that easy to jump directly onto the platform that you want to while also avoiding the ghosts. As per usual, using Peach definitely helps. As you continue along, you'll pass by another water section where you can grab an invincibility star, and actually, down below, you'll be able to grab the second green star, while defeating the boos along your way. Beyond that is a warp block which will take you back outside to the checkpoint. Over here is a challenge that can be difficult. There's narrow pathways that you have to follow, so you gotta carefully walk a lot slower. The catch is that as you jump around, it'll also slant in the direction that your weight is pulling, and as this is all going on, you also have to avoid a couple of ghosts and even make a jump in order to grab the third green star. It's not too difficult unless you're trying to speedrun it, but you just gotta make sure you take your time and you'll be fine. Prior to the end of the stage, you do get a fun little sumo wrestling match where you gotta destroy a couple more of these guys, and doing so will spawn a warp block that'll take you to the end of the stage. Now, World 6-3 I think is one of the most fun stages in the game. It actually requires you to have collected 100 green stars to access, obviously if you're going for full completion, but if you're not going through full completion, I definitely think this is one that you should do. World 6-3 Hands-On Haul. Now, the one downside about the stage is that it can be annoying if you're not using the touchscreen, because you are going to need to interact with different portions of the stage in order to access them or see what's hidden, but that's also part of the fun of the level, poking around and seeing what's where. I also just really love the vibes and the theming over here. It's got like a traditional Japanese dojo combined with some traditional Chinese elements. It actually reminds me of a big Bowser castle that we'd see in Mario Odyssey, but that's for another video. And there are actually large gongs that feature Bowser's symbol. In any case, as you move through this fun stage, you'll be unlocking many doors, you'll be avoiding various enemies, including spikes that'll throw logs at you. You even get to turn into a Goomba at one point, and it makes it like a covert operation because the enemies don't realize you're a bad guy. Or I guess a good guy, but they think you're a bad guy. And as you move along and open those doors, you'll even find a green star along your path. Now that star is being protected by some Galoombas. What is cool, however, is that once you grab the green star, they have this like confused look on their face. I suppose that could just be their resting face, but it looks funny. After that, you'll eventually move on to the next segment, which takes place outdoors. The green star is floating over a pit, which you're supposed to technically grab a propeller suit and then come back and fly up, but you could also just jump down there and grab it and fall to your demise and do it again. At this point, you're kind of meant to traverse this entire area while collecting the different keys so you can access the warp block at the very top, and it's a combination of using the propeller suit as well as some careful platforming. Now, I think technically players could just actually use a propeller and cheese this part of the stage, skipping everything entirely and heading to the final flag, but that means you won't grab the rest of the collectibles. Once the warp block is unlocked, you head back inside, and moving through some more narrow corridors while avoiding spikes, you'll find a gong at the very end of the pathway that if you slam into it, it'll actually warp you into this tiny little segment that you were technically able to see before when you were outside with a spike that was throwing a spike log, allowing you to quickly defeat him and grab the next star. Now, all that remains is the stamp, and it's actually pretty hard to find this one. In the previous segment where the spikes were throwing the logs down at the player, you're actually meant to follow the path those earlier logs aren't rolling in, and it'll take you outside. And in using your propeller, you can fly upwards and grab the stamp, head over to the warp block at the end of the corridor again, and this time you can jump to the top of the flag. Straight from there, it's Deep Jungle Drift. Remember how earlier on I told you that you'd eventually make it to one of those purple waste levels, and it's going to be a lot more difficult as the game moves on? Yeah, this is where it starts, and part of it is because this is an auto-scroller, so it can be annoying. Now, in the very beginning, if you take a path that takes you on top of the cage instead of staying on the logs, you'll be able to skip a lot of the earlier sections and also grab the stamp. But doing so will actually cause you to miss the first star, so we'll go back to that one. After the checkpoint, as you're floating along on the raft and jumping throughout the cages, you'll find a super bell which allows you to climb up to get on top of the cages yet again. If you're quick enough, you'll be able to interact with a green star ring which will spawn 8 green coins, and you know what to do. And if you're successful at it, you'll get the second green star. And you will want to keep a hold of that super bell because you kinda need it to grab the third green star. At the very end, right before our player heads into the warp block that'll take him to the final flag, you need to climb up the wall in order to reach the green star. And circling back for the first green star in this stage, it's actually in the same spot that the stamp was, except you're supposed to be on the bottom and you're supposed to run through the clear pipe. After that, it's the 6A blockade against Prince Bully. I would say this is actually the most interesting blockade that you would face thus far, because it's not really just a straightforward jump on the head of the enemy like all the other ones are. You need to guide the Prince Bully into the pipes, which will turn him into basically a tin can. Then that's when he's vulnerable and you hit him. It's still like not really that big of a deal, much like most of the boss fights in this game, but it's a little bit more exciting than just facing more of the Goombas, for example. In any case, defeating the blockade will give you access to a stamp, but it will also give you access to World 6-6, Bullet Bill Base. There is a lot of climbing in this one. You're actually working your way up the base, so the Super Bell will prove to be very valuable. You'll also, perhaps without surprise, be facing a lot of bullet bills along the way. As you climb up the stage, as you make your way to the peak of the early segment, you'll find the first green star waiting for you before heading into the warp block to go to the next area. Over here, the stage is a bit more horizontal and takes place over more bottomless pits, so it does offer a slight bit more challenge than the previous segment. There's a fun little challenge where you have to kind of climb onto the conveyor belts in order to reach the green star off to the right. And if you have the super bell at the very end of the stage, it'll allow you to grab the stamp, and it will also allow you to grab the top of the flagpole. I also did miss the second star. You just have to climb the wall with the cat suit when you get to the checkpoint, and it'll take you to a warp block, which will take you to a very quick bonus room where you have to climb onto the wall, which is moving in a circle, and as you're attached to the wall, it'll spin you right around so you can collect the green star. And beyond that, we get to another snow theme stage, which I believe is only the second snow theme stage in this entire game. And it's also the introduction of the Typhoos, in a stage that's appropriately named the Typhoo Flurries. I'll be honest, I actually completely forgot these guys were in 3D World. I knew they were in Odyssey, and you actually can control one in Odyssey, which is pretty fun. It's my second mention of Odyssey. I think I need to play that game next. But yeah, I was kind of surprised when I bumped into them here because I completely forgot they were in 3D World. Anyway, you should know how it goes with these guys. They're just going to try to blow you off the stage any chance that they get. We know they definitely have the lungs for it. Aside from that, while the wall-ups from Mario 3D Land are not here, if you remember, those are the things that jump in front of you, and they're technically Thwomp relatives according to the Mario Wiki, they have a spiky variant that's introduced in this game, the Walleyes. And as you'd expect, they will try to block your path. This stage also does contain the ice skate, which I always think is cool, but the first ice skate is kind of just there for show. Just beyond it is a segment where you can grab the first green star, but the Typhoos, if you're not careful, will blow you down towards a sheet of spikes. And actually, amongst those spikes is the stamp. As you move along to the next segment, there's another ice rink. This one's a lot larger, and off to the left side of it is a sheet of spikes that you gotta jump over in order to access a bonus room. And in that bonus room is actually a long obstacle course where you have to skate to get to the green star before the time runs out. Don't run into any walls, otherwise you will fail. After that's complete and you move on to the next segment, there's a green star that's hanging over a gust of wind, so you'll need to jump into it just at the right time so the gust of wind can blow you upwards. Or, you know, you can just fall, then start the life over. Beyond that is a challenge that's more difficult than you'd expect, but it's also easy enough if you just take your time. It's a combination of the Typhoos that are trying to blow you off the stage, as well as the Walleyes blocking your path. Working your way past them will get you to the top of the level where you're able to access the top of the flag as long as you can avoid the Typhoos that are up there. And finally, we get to World 6-7, Fuzzy Time Mine, which is another auto-scroller in this world, but it is a lot harder than the previous one. The screen will be panning upwards and you'll be chased by fuzzies as you move as fast as you can. You'll also have to be very quick to grab the collectibles on the way. For example, the stamp is only visible when the platform above it allows you to access it, and the first green star will require you to ground pound onto a cloud all before the fuzzies get to you. After you get to the first bit and the camera starts panning over to the right, you have to jump upwards onto some platforms and grab the second green star before the fuzzies get there. And finally, as you frantically continue along, you have to use the springboard to grab the third green star before making it to the flag. It's a quick stage, but there's little room for error because if you do make a mistake, the fuzzies will grab you. And that means starting over. And before getting to the final Bowser Castle, there's actually a warp pipe that you can take, which will throw you in Mystery House Throwdown. You know the drill at this point. There are 5 green stars that you need to collect. But the gimmick for this one is it involves throwing baseballs in order to access them. The first 4 are pretty simple. The 5th one is not bad either, to be honest. But if you're not prepared for it, then it can pass pretty quickly. You have to quickly throw baseballs at the switches behind the thwomps. I failed at it a couple of times, and because it's the 5th challenge, you had to redo all of them over again, which was annoying. But me screwing up was more of a mistake on my end, just trying to be a little bit too quick. But with that all said and done, it was time for the final stage of Bowser's Bob-omb Brigade. You kinda know the drill by now. It's a auto-scroller, kinda like a parade. The fire flower is very useful here. There are a lot of bob-ombs. You'll need to use those bob-ombs to blow up some bricks, either to quickly bring out all of the platforms that you can climb above, or to destroy some enemies or defeat some blocks. Actually, what's funny is for this first green star, I was just trying to throw a bomb at the Hammer Bro, and that ended up causing all these platforms to rise up, and the green star was just above them. I honestly didn't even notice I grabbed it initially. It's a similar idea for the second green star. Made it to another segment with a bob-omb, and I had to take it and throw it over on the gray brick. And the green star was in that brick. And the third green star was just along the way if you're able to extend the platforms out over here. And finally, for the stamp, you're required to carry a bob-omb to the very end of the stage and throw it at the wall that's cracked so you can grab it before heading into the warp pipe and facing off against Boom Boom yet again. I don't know that a second Boom Boom fight was really necessary. They try to make it a bit more difficult so that while he's spinning around, there's an extra shell too. And I guess in fairness, I did lose a couple of lives while facing off against him because of it. But I don't know, I feel like if you're gonna have generic boss fights, especially ones that are repeated like this, you might as well just use the Koopa Kids. I don't know, the boss fights are just very underwhelming in this game, I think. Now, technically over here, World 6 is done, but there's another one of those pathways that you have to effectively take on like a mid-boss in order to get to the next area. And it's a fight titled the Motley Boss Blob's Big Battle. Honestly, it's a pretty short fight. I completed it in a couple of minutes. You're actually given a double cherry just before the fight starts too. He's a silly looking clown that's gonna bounce around and eventually he'll land on the floor and needs to jump on his head while avoiding all of the little spheres that he makes. The additional cherries that you can collect along the way are very useful because it'll allow you to take an extra hit too, since those are very easy to get hit with all these spears. But yeah, it's pretty simple. You take 3 hits, you grab the green star, you head into the warp pipe, and you're officially done with World 6. A fairly difficult world. It continues on everything that we've been dealing with ever since World 4 with the difficulty curve and the uniqueness. And I say that with praise because unlike in 3D Land, for example, where it felt like as the game went on, more themes and more settings and more levels were getting repeated, over here, while there were some reused assets and themes, it wasn't nearly as egregious. And the stage gimmicks and the increase in the difficulty and the creativity behind how the collectibles are hidden made it all that much more memorable. And it's only going to get better as we head into World Castle. So I'm not really sure why they decided to call this World Castle. It's just the 7th world. I mean, it takes place in a fiery lava castle theme. But in all of the previous worlds, they were a lot more direct about the naming convention and just called it based off of the number rather than what the stage themes were. And it's made even weirder because World 8, which we'll get to next, is World Bowser. So I don't know, maybe they were trying to pull a fast one on people and making them think that World Castle was going to be the peak of the game and that was the end. And then it turns out that it's like, hey, it's just the 7th world. The next one is World Bowser. That's the actual climax of the game. And I'm probably complaining way too much about this. Like, there are going to be bonus worlds that come after this, and they're not numbered, but that makes sense because they're the extra special worlds in the game. Although, in this game, I don't think they're actually technically known as special worlds, so that's another... yeah, whatever. Okay, back on track. Alright, so World 7 is one of those worlds that took me an hour and a half to get through. I know I didn't really give you the timing that it took for me to accomplish every single one of the worlds in this game, but World 7 is definitely one of the longer ones. And unlike in some of the previous worlds where the difficulty was in my inability to find the collectibles throughout the stages, no, this is just good platforming. The game actually kicks up to the point where I struggled. And to be fair, we've been working our way towards this. You know, up until a few worlds ago, I had what seemed like an unlimited amount of lives remaining. And through the past couple of worlds, I shred them down all the way to the point where when I started World 7, or World Castle, I guess, we'll call it by its actual name, I only had 10 lives on hand. And yes, I actually saw the game over screen, before even making it past the midpoint blockades. But let's talk about it. Stage 1, Fort Fire Bros. As you expect, there's going to be a lot of challenges where you have to face off against some Fire Bros, and you're given a chance to grab a Fire Flower early on so you can use that against them. Part of the fun of this stage is knowing when and where to hit the different clear pipes so you can make sure you defeat a Fire Bro and can go through that pipe comfortably, with the first green star pretty easy to nab after you get rid of those enemies. Shortly after that, there'll be a couple of fireball sticks that are spinning in a circle with a block that you can ground pound in the middle of them, and doing so will get you up into the sky where you can grab the stamp. And it also perfectly lines you up so you can jump down and hit the enemies down below, and defeating the Fire Bro will give you access to the next area. In the next area, you'll see some thwomps that are up against a wall. And by this point in time, I imagine most Mario fans would think to jump on top of the thwomp to see if it takes you anywhere, and sure enough, up above, there is a warp pipe that'll take you to a bonus room, similar to one we saw previously where you have to guide the ball down into the P-switch so you can grab the green star. Beyond that, as you move along the stage, once again, you'll have to be a little bit creative about how to defeat the enemies along your path. Via the green pipes, eventually you will see a green ring that you can use to spawn 8 green coins, and once you collect those green coins, you'll move on to the next segment, where it's a pretty difficult challenge if you've lost your Fire Flower by this point, because there is a single Hammer Bro that you need to defeat, and he's standing on top of a stack of Goombas. So obviously, if you're coming into this one unarmed, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to finish this one without taking any damage. Fortunately, if you are able to accomplish it, you can move on to the next section where jumping on the head of another Fire Bro will get you access to the top of the flagpole and move on to stage 2, the Switch Black Ruins. So this stage is very unique. It's got the directly overhead view that we saw in a stage that was in Mario 3D Land before, which, at least in that game, was considered an homage to the top-down 2D Zelda games. But in addition to this special camera angle, there's also a light gimmick, in that you kind of have a spotlight over you and you can't really see further ahead. You'll make it to some points in time where you're expected to solve some kind of puzzle or challenge to move on to the next segment. They range and it starts off fairly simple, you just gotta make all of the blue switches yellow. And as you pass by that challenge, if you don't have one already, you'll get a good chance to grab a Fire Flower, and that'll make things a little bit easier because the fireballs do light up the area around you. And as a matter of fact, you're going to need those fireballs in order to access the first green star, because after you get past the next room with switches, you'll you'll have to light up 4 torches to grab the first green star. The second green star will be in the next corridor at the very end before heading into the next room. It's actually pretty easy to miss, but there is a small little route just to the right of the screen where you can access the second green star. You'll continue along with more challenges where you have to light up more switches, and they'll just get a little bit more difficult as you move along. Eventually, you'll move over a river of lava and notice the stamp on your right before entering the next room like this. And after you get through that, before jumping into the final warp pipe, there will be an invisible block on the back of the wall where if you hit it and then jump on top of it, you'll find the final green star. Finally, maneuvering through some platforms in the air as well as a fire-breathing piranha plant, you'll be able to access the top of the flagpole. And after that is the third stage, Red Hot Run. Alright, so as you'd expect, this is a speedrunning stage. You have 100 seconds to get through all of it, and if you're a madman, you'll choose Toad to start this one off. And doing so caused me to jump right off the cliff after I grabbed the first green star. Following that, there is a segment where you go through the green ring and you have to run around in a circle and grab all of the 8 coins to move forward. And when you make it to the stamp, if you're a madman and you're still using Toad like myself, you might fall off the cliff yet again. The thing about this stage is that if you do kind of move forward carefully and you're not trying to grab everything, it could be a lot of fun to just run through it as fast as you can, seeing which jumps you can make even if you're not supposed to try them. But I will say that the first time running through it, if you're trying to grab everything and you don't care about losing a life or two, you're probably going to repeat a lot of the moments in this stage. I found that the third green star in particular gave me the most challenge, and that's partially because it is closer to the end of the stage, and with all of the previous collectibles, if I had to go out of my way to grab it before falling off the cliff, it was pretty easy. But in this case, I would go for that Hollywood jump or make an attempt to grab it and either bump into a spike or miss it altogether. And because it is the final collectible in the stage, that means you're going to have to run through almost everything over again in order to get back to that same point in the level and try it again. Either way, once you do grab that green star, you can make it to the end of the level and move on. And if you're keeping track, I am at 6 lives remaining as I enter into level 4, the Boiling Blue Bully Belt. So running through this one is actually very annoying. As you're trying to jump through it, there are platforms that will rise up from the ground with arrows on them. You're kind of meant to use that as a guide to know which platform is going to rise up at what point in time so you can go ahead and move on. The first green star is pretty easy to grab. There will be a green ring that you have to grab in order to spawn the 8 coins so you can pick those up. And really it's just a matter of being able to comfortably run in a circle. I did end up switching to Peach for this stage because I found that to be a lot easier than using Toad because he was way too fast. Honestly, I probably should have done the same thing in the previous level. In the following segment, you'll have to follow those platforms yet again, only this time they're going to be on a linear path that you have to kind of move along with at their own pace while avoiding spikes that are trying to knock you down. And what makes it even worse is that off to the left side of one of those pathways, you'll see the stamp to grab. And if you do make the jump to grab that stamp, you might not be quick enough to get back onto the platforms. Now, I'll be the first to admit that probably a very big reason why I lost so many lives, especially in the early part of the stage, is because I kept trying to go really fast, which is definitely a problem that I have all the time when I'm playing this game. But in fairness, up until I got to this level, that wasn't really an issue all that much. Like, the invincibility leaf popped up for me pretty early on. I was at 0 lives remaining too. But I was too stubborn to grab it. I just decided it's probably better for me to just slow down and take a deep breath. Fortunately, knowing that I only had a single life remaining did help a lot because I was more careful. I got to the warp block that would take me to a bonus room where I had to defeat a bully real quick so I can grab the second green star. And then finally, the challenge at the very end is along the wall where you have to just kind of go through this obstacle course. Platforms coming in and out of the wall, bullies along your way, rotating spike logs around cylindrical platforms, and off to the front of one of those platforms is the third green star, which you also have to be careful to dodge the spike while grabbing. Honestly, it turned out me having only 1 life remaining unlocked the potential that I had, and I was able to get through the stage without losing another life, surprisingly, and not grabbing game over just yet. And that's including a little challenge at the very end where you have to defeat the final bullies in order to make it to the flag and grab the top of it. I was not as fortunate, however, when I took on the first blockade. Yeah, there are 2. The Castle A blockade is the Boulder blockade. It's a repeat of a previous boss fight, only this time it's a little bit more difficult because only one of the boulders that are dropped down for you to grab and throw at the enemy are actually solid rocks that you can grab. The other 2 are magma fireballs. Now, that being said, since I did get game over, I was able to grab a catsuit power-up, and that made it easy when I revisited the stage after the game over. Even though I did take a hit very quickly and lost the catsuit power-up, so I was stuck using the Tanuki tail, which, had the same effect. This was surprisingly one of the more challenging mini-boss fights, I would say, in this game. Definitely would prefer more of these instead of the fights against Boom Boom and Pom Pom. The following fight is called the Prince Bully Blockade is Back, and it is more or less the same concept as last time, only this time the guy can fire some projectiles at you. I found this fight to be a lot easier, and I didn't feel that the projectiles that he shot really changed it all that much. And with the blockades defeated, we can move on to World Castle-5, the Trick Trap Tower. Another vertical stage, and for me, honestly, it feels like one that belongs in Mario Galaxy based off of some of the aesthetics and just in general how it's laid out. It's like a giant rectangular block that you have to work your way upwards while avoiding some thwomps and using the platforms to rise up. Once you get to the very top of the first tower, you have to defeat 3 different Magic Koopas, and doing so grants you access to a green star, but it's actually the second green star in the stage. I had to come back to the first one, so we'll go back to that later. However, when you move on to the next segment, you get yet another tower that you're meant to climb upwards on, but you might notice that on the way up there is a locked warp block. So you're going to be moving up this tower, but your mission here is to collect all of the keys to get that warp block. And they are more or less laid along your path. The most difficult thing about this part is the enemies that turn into electric goop that you can't walk over, as they are very easy to accidentally jump into when you're moving up the ramps, especially the swinging ones. The funny thing is when you do make it to the top and you're like, oh hey, I got all the keys, it's just time for me to climb back down, a toxic goop spawns and actually just starts to chase you down to the bottom of the stage. And this might not be relevant to how another player might do this, but by that point in time, in my mind, I was like, if I'm gonna have to climb this tower again, I might as well just start the level from the very beginning so I don't have to do it again one more time, and make sure I grab the earlier green star. So I decided to exit and start over, and this time I chose Luigi because he has a higher jump to him, which will help while you're trying to move upwards. So both the stamp and the green star are pretty easy to grab once you do figure out where they are. It's just figuring out where they are can be annoying. And basically when you get to the very top of the tower, if you jump off the cliff to the side, you will land on a set of clouds that are holding the stamp, and just below that is the green star. And the final green star, one that actually gave me some issues and required me to start the stage over, is hidden behind a set of blocks that you can't break while you're in your smaller form, and there's not really any mushrooms to grab around here. So if you take a hit in this very narrow corridor with hazards along the way that could very likely make you take a hit, effectively it means you will be unable to grab the green star during that life. So that's why every time that happened, I basically took it as a loss and would have to end the life and start over. Fortunately, eventually I was able to grab that final green star, I was able to collect all of the keys, and I was finally able to end the stage. Darn thing took me like 12 whole minutes on a single stage. Funny thing is, I only had 1 life remaining too, so after getting my first game over, I was already struggling to potentially end up getting a second game over. But anyway, after that, you can take a warp pipe and it'll take you to a Captain Toad stage, titled Captain Toad Gets Thwomped. The big gimmick here are obviously, in addition to all the thwomps, conveyor belts all throughout the level. So a lot of this stage will be knowing how to utilize those conveyor belts and those thwomps in order to guide Captain Toad to the top of the stage and grab the green stars along the path. While it is intense, it's very fast paced, and it does require a decent bit of timing, I found it to be a fairly relaxing level after the one that I just went through before it. Following that is World 6, the Hammerhead Reef, an underwater stage with glowing hammerhead enemies. Getting through this stage and being able to grab everything will be made much easier, and in some cases required, to have a fireball, a super bell, or even a tanuki leaf. For example, early on, you're going to need them to break a crate to grab the first green star. Once you get through that easy first segment, you get to an area where now you're going to be kind of forced to follow a specific track. Whether it's because there's an underwater fan that's pushing you in a certain direction, or because you have to follow the enemies moving in their path. Either way, you're going to have to time your traversal as you get through this. And in this area, the second green star will be dragging along the back of one of the hammerheads, which reminds me of the terrifying eel from Super Mario 64, only this time it's not nearly as nightmare-inducing or difficult. As you swim around these pathways, you'll pass by the warp pipe, which will allow you to exit pretty simply, to be honest, and you'll end up in this wide open area with a bunch of fish that I put a lot of time and effort into searching all around because I was convinced something had to be hidden here, and it was really kind of meaningless, just a minor visual treat, I guess. After that, you jump back into the warp pipe and I'll take you to water. Over here, there will be rotating hammerheads where you kind of have to follow their path and avoid getting hit by them. Players will also need to make sure they keep hold of their fire flyer at this point so they can use it to destroy the spike balls that are protecting the green star in the clear pipe. I was really annoyed because I took a hit right before making it to the clear pipe and lost my fire flower, so I had to redo that. And then as you move along, there are just more creative ways where it's going to test your swimming skills as you avoid various hazards along your path. And in the final segment, there will be alternating hammerheads that are either going upwards or downwards, so you gotta use your quick timing swimming skills in order to get through that, while also grabbing the stamp along the path and ending the stage. Which, even that final bit, you might take a hit because you're trying to avoid some hammerheads. But with that accomplished, it's time for stage 7, the Simmering Lava Lake. And you just know you're getting close to the end where the lava lakes start to show up. Now, obviously, there is a lava gimmick in this stage where that's the hazard and you can't really fall down into it, but it also has the traditional gimmick where that lava rises up, so you gotta stay high enough to avoid everything. Players will be granted a boomerang bro to make it easier to get through everything, especially to hit all of the dry bones along your path, and you're even gonna need that boomerang if you want to grab the first green star. Through most of the stage, you'll also be facing off against a lot of those rolling magma balls that we saw in the earlier blockade fight, and they very likely will do damage, especially because they leave a residue of lava that you can't touch. You'll take damage if you grab that, so that makes it just all the more difficult. But the boomerang power-up will help keep them away from you if you're able to hold on to that boomerang power-up, which I was not able to. Either way, shortly after the first green star, there's a second green ring where you can use that to grab the 8 coins and grab the second green star, and the third green star can be collected fairly simply, if you're using Peach at least, just beyond the checkpoint. You gotta make the right jump and hover over to it. Now there's a whole lot of platforming at the end of the stage in order to reach the flag, as well as avoiding blargs along your way, but it's actually not that difficult to get through at all. What was difficult, however, is I made it to the end of the stage without the stamp, so I had no idea how I passed that one. And sure enough, it is in that final area because I didn't jump to a specific section since I decided to go for the green star, where it's hidden below the platform that you're standing on, but only when the lava level decreases enough for you to be able to comfortably go down there without setting ablaze. And this is probably a good time to mention that a lot of this game would be way more difficult if you did not hold on to these collectibles after losing a life. Because that's been part of the challenge in some of the previous games. You only get to keep that collectible by getting to a checkpoint or getting to the end of the stage before losing a life, which meant that you can't just grab something and take an L. And in some cases, I think the game would be a lot more fun if it required you to do that. I don't know if fun is necessarily the right word to use, but I think I would enjoy that insane challenge in some of these stages. But since it's not a requirement, I'll enjoy this game by whatever rules that it allows. Now, entering the castle of World Castle, which is appropriately titled Castle Castle, Bowser's Lava Lake Keep, most people would be forgiven if they assumed this was the final stage of the game. I mean, it looks like it, especially coming from 3D Land before. It's the Bowser Castle in World Castle. What more could go on after this? Plus, you need like 130 green stars in order to be able to access this alone. Which, if players are not going for all the collectibles and they're skipping different levels, it will very likely require some form of backtracking. But anyway, as you move through this level, there will be a lot of boomerang bros along your way. You'll have to be pretty good at wall jumping in order to grab the first green star. And then just after that, while there's a cannon shooting soccer balls at you, you can fling them into the gray bricks, which will give you access to the stamp. The stage does start to get a little bit more intense as you work your way towards the checkpoint, avoiding hazards, whether they're random spike squares, or any form of fire or lava, whether they're fireball sticks or explosives or embers jumping out of the lava. I did get another game over at this point in time too, mind you, so I had to start over from the very beginning. At some point just beyond the checkpoint flag, if you have the boomerang, you're able to reach and grab the green star. If you don't have the boomerang, you're able to take Peach and grab the green star. And as it turns out, that is the third green star of the stage. So circling back, in that very first area where a soccer ball was used to knock over the platform in order to access the next location, right where we grabbed the stamp, foolishly, I should have known not to knock over that platform, and instead to grab a catsuit power-up and climb up there to grab the green star. I will let you use your imagination to figure out how long you think it took for me to figure this one out, because I refuse to use a guide, because I'm like, how many places could you possibly hide a green star in this stage? And honestly, I did this on a revisit. I finished the stage one time, went and grabbed a catsuit, and came back because I was like, I gotta traverse every single wall in this level to figure out where the hell this green star is. Fortunately, it worked out and I was able to find it. And yet, even then, with my second fight against Bowser, I just decided I'm going to take the Tanuki Leaf because I really do not feel like going through this the proper way again. First time was hard enough. But yeah, Bowser's just going to be throwing soccer balls at you and you got to swing it back at him while avoiding all of the various puddles of lava along your way. World 7 was a headache. It was a challenge. It was difficult. But the scene when you first get to World 8, when you get to World Bowser, just seeing it light up and everything in front of you, that alone kind of makes it worth it. Like, for me at least, I mean, thinking how could you top a stage that's themed after the lava and ends with a Bowser castle? And you get to this site right here with the giant Bowser in front of you and the whole carnival slash casino slash nighttime theme with a volcano over to the right of them. Then the Ferris wheel on the left with Bowser's clown car in the middle of it. And even the giant skyscraper tower that's just beyond the Bowser building at the very end. I don't know, for me it kind of reminded me of the final Bowser world in Mario World from the SNES, obviously. It's just a nice visual. It's another one of those moments where the camera just kind of drops down a bit so it's over your character's shoulder, only this time it's in the overhead world rather than in a giant stage. And it's just nice because you go through World Castle, you think that should be the end of the game, and then you see this and you're like, oh, this is the final challenge. At least for the base game. Obviously, there's the additional stuff after, like every other Mario game. But you see this and you're like, okay, this is World 8. And all I knew, at least, going into this was after all that I had gone through in World 7, as well as the few worlds before it where the difficulty ramped up a bit, but after my 3 game overs that I got back in World 7, I was very ready to play not only World 8, but everything that would come beyond it. But of course, before we get to all of those special bonus worlds, let's simply just focus on World 8, or, as it's known in Mario 3D World, World Bowser. Yeah, I love this part, both when I'm actually playing the games as well as when I'm doing the retrospectives. There's just something always so momentous about the final challenges in the game, and it dates all the way back to the original Super Mario Bros., where it's basically the same concept. You go through most of this adventure, even with the uptick in difficulty, it doesn't feel like it's all that crazy. And then those final worlds, those final stages in the final world, those World 8, or in this case, the World Bowser challenges, with all of the set pieces and all of the aesthetics, they do a phenomenal job making sure you understand that this is the final challenge of the game. Or, of course, of the base game. Mind you, World 8 took me less time than World 7 did, but I think there could actually be an argument made that World 7 is harder than World 8. But World 8 is just so much more memorable. Even the first stage in this World Bowser, as they call it, feels like the kind of challenge that would more likely take place as like a World 4 or World 5 castle. It's the spiky spike bridge, and it's challenging enough in the setting and the tone and the themes behind it. They could easily be reminiscent of a final castle in any given world. Also, the raindrops dripping down the screen was such a nice touch. It just adds to the dramatic effect of this final world. As you're running through these towers and avoiding the spikes on these bridges, dealing with the various enemies along your path like Fire Bros and Dry Bones, you'll quickly be able to climb up one of the towers and grab the first green star. And it's just all about the platforming here, or, you know, flying with Peach if that's easier, because it usually is. The spiky bridge will not always be stationary, sometimes they will move back and forth. So it's all about the player being careful in their timing. Following the checkpoint, you'll make it to a fork in the road. You're meant to go to the right, but if you head across the bridge to the left and you're careful in avoiding the spikes, you can grab the first stamp. Not too long after that, as you're sprinting across the bridge and trying to avoid the spikes, you'll run by a tower that will reward you with a super bell. And sure enough, if you grab that super bell, you can climb the tower and head into a warp room where you can find the second star. And that bonus room could actually blindside you. You gotta be pretty quick. You can't run the wrong way, otherwise you'll run out of time. I got the green star with only 1 second remaining. Beyond that, you'll continue along the bridge while avoiding the spikes in order to get to the next warp block, making it to a big platform with a whole bunch of dry bones just flying around. But fortunately for you, it's just a very quick spectacle. Off to the side, you can grab a star and defeat all of those critters, allowing you to carefully time a jump over some platforms that are disappearing in order to grab the green star. And finally, closing off the stage, you'll be riding a very large platform that has a bunch of spikes that will continue to pop out, so you gotta stay on your toes before making it to the final flag, where once again there is a mini challenge where you have to avoid the spikes in order to reach the top of the flag. Easy enough to get through without a single loss of a life, but more challenging to get through without taking any hits. Now what follows is Stage 2, Plessie's Dune Downhill. It'll be another Plessie challenge, only this time it's down a river of sand. You'll have to be a lot quicker on this one, especially timing your jumps off of the bouncing enemies so you can grab the first green star. I had to restart the stage at least a few times in order to make sure I can grab it before moving on to the next segment. The second green star will be a bit simpler, you just gotta run over a bunch of enemies that are carrying it. Eventually you'll get to a point where there are a couple of Bowser statues, and if you notice that there's a stamp just beyond them, you might make a leap of faith and realize that there's an invisible bridge that will take you across and grab the stamp. Now, it is the third green star that's a lot easier to miss, and really the only reason I had to do this level a few times. You'll notice a bunch of sand sculptures throughout the stage, and a Bowser one will be right before the end of the level. If you ram into that, it'll create a trail of coins that will take you to the third and final green star. It's simple enough for me to recap for you, but as it goes with a lot of these stages, just due to the nature of how often you might have to repeat some challenges over and over again, especially if it's, for example, the final collectible nearing the end of the stage, it will take you a lot more time than you'd expect to get through. Defeating the Plessie stage will take you to Cookie Cogworks, Ryujinx. Another dessert-themed stage, and a welcome one, I might add. You'll be running through a bunch of cogs that, as you'd guess, are made of cookies, defeating various enemies along your path, including some giant piranha plants. Utilizing Boomerang Mario will make things a lot easier for you, and by being thorough in your search with the early cogs, one of them will take you right up to the first green star. Following that, you'll eventually be able to take a clear pipe that'll take you to the checkpoint, and you'll get to use the Sprixie's binoculars to see what lies ahead. More cookie cogs and more piranha plants. Going through this challenge is simple enough, even without taking any hits. And once you make it up there, you'll notice a bunch of ants that are coming up through a hole. Defeating them with your boomerang will allow you to drop down there and grab the stamp. Moving along your path and defeating the enemies along the way, eventually you can drop down into another bonus room, and you immediately have to be on your toes and run around the rotating platform in order to reach the next green star. Finally, you'll make it to the flagpole, and you might be a bit confused because it seems like there's more of the stage beyond it. Something that hasn't really been common at all in any of the 3D Mario games. Normally when you get to the end of the objective, that's the end of the stage. But I do recall in some of the earlier 2D titles that it was very much possible to find a way to avoid the end of the level and figure out what's going on behind it. In this case, the player is meant to remain on the cog and drop downwards below the flag, where they can then take a route into an area just down below and chase after the bunny rabbit holding the final green star before taking a warp pipe and coming back to the flag. Now again, this is the kind of challenge where it's very easy for me to explain it to you, but what players might not realize is you get to the end of the level, you grab the flagpole, and you don't know where to look anymore for that green star. If you're not using a guide, like I wasn't, I spent the entire time going through the entire stage looking through every nook and cranny. Believe it or not, it was very reminiscent of walking into a Mario 64 level and looking for a star on one of the stages that has a fairly linear path. You're looking everywhere to see if you can grab the star before making it to the end. And then even when I did eventually realize that, oh, there's more beyond the flag, I can just jump around it, trying to make that jump instead of just allowing the gear to put me down below the flag, caused me to jump into the flag, which meant the level was over and you had to start from the beginning again. So it seems like a fairly simple challenge. Just move beyond the final flag and you can grab the third green star, ends up resulting in players potentially having to redo the stage at least a few times. Or in my case, it was like 2 additional times. So yeah, it's not necessarily the difficulty of the stage itself, but it's more in the creativity behind how to find that final collectible that makes it a little bit more of a level that's just frustrating enough to belong in the final world of the base game. Now after that, you get to the midpoint of the world, and it's a Bowser fight, the Bowser Express. Another one of those train levels where you're going through an auto-scroller. Very quickly, you can immediately jump on top of the train and grab the first green star. There are a lot more enemies here. The background visuals also are completely consistent with the entirety of the world Bowser, passing through all of these various enemies, including some bullies as well as a whole darn fish tank. You'll make it to a swinging spike that you'll have to dodge while collecting 8 coins to grab the second green star. And then if you accidentally jump straight into the door ahead of you, which logically that's what you would plan on doing, you'll notice the stamp is overhead, which means you'll have to repeat the stage at some point in order to grab that. Or so that's what I thought, and then I went and ground pounded on the block and it took me right to the roof of this train car, and I was just barely quick enough to grab that stamp and move forward. 100% a lucky grab on my end. And while the last green star was very easy to notice, because it was right behind the fire bro, and this was done in an earlier train level as well, the problem is trying to grab that stamp made me take a bunch of hits, so I only had 1 hit remaining, and going through that hammer bro and grabbing the star, while that was easy enough, jumping back I wasn't so lucky. So while yes, everything was grabbable in one go, I did have to do this level twice. Making it to the end of the train is a fight against Pom Pom. It's the exact same concept as before, only this time there are more decoys, but still it's easy enough to get through this in one go. And this effectively serves as like the blockade, or the midpoint of this world. Beyond that is World Bowser-4, Footlight Lane. So this is a gimmick that's new to this game, but obviously not new to the 3D Mario franchise. There are invisible panels that you can walk through, and they will only become visible as you walk on them, or at the very least get close to them. As you run through the stage, this castle in the sky, similar to what we saw in the previous level, you'll be avoiding thwomps and once again dealing with some dry bones enemies, and as you move through the various towers of this castle, you'll find the first green star hidden off to the side, above an invisible bridge. After that is a segment that will trip your mind out a little bit. The path becomes circular and you'll be able to keep track of said path because of the spikes that are spinning into circles, but the catch is at the very end of it, in the final circular platform, there's a green ring which will spawn 8 green coins, and because of how quickly these spikes are moving, I actually failed at this one. I lost a life and I had to start over. Fortunately, this was just beyond the checkpoint, so I didn't have to redo too much, and I was able to get through it the second time. Now, kind of like what they do with the stamp over here. So first off, you might notice it in your peripheral vision off to the right side of the screen. In case you do not notice it, however, there is a little bump on the ground as you're traveling that you might notice. And ground pounding that will actually light up the floor panel to your right, which, if you just follow it, will take you to said stamp. This is the game being just a little bit generous, making sure players can find that stamp. Moving through the next area, you're going to be dealing with a lot of bullet bills that are chasing after you. Off to the left side, you can jump and go to a bonus room so you can grab the third green star. And then continuing along, avoiding the final bit of bullet bills, you can head to the final warp block, which will take you to the final flag. And beyond that is stage 5, a dungeon, a deep water dungeon. Obviously, this will be a water level that takes place inside the dungeons of a castle. Water levels will be rising and falling, and it's on you to make sure you're jumping in between the different bodies of water so you can continue to swim everywhere you need to go. Utilizing what is effectively a gravity gimmick outside of this non-Mario Galaxy game, you can swim to the top of one of the spikes and grab the stamp, before using a block of water to swim upwards and get to the checkpoint. Now, mind you, just before that, you might notice over to the left, there is a route with a glowing green light, so the star is there, but you're not going to be able to grab it without a cat suit, so this will be a stage you'll have to revisit with the power-up. And that's what I did. I exited the stage, since the early part with grabbing the stamp was easy enough, so I didn't care if I lost that progress. Came back with a cat suit, grabbed the first star, and continued on to the Plessy challenge. Yep, it's Plessy once again. Except it's very short and arguably unnecessary. You're just a straight shot through a narrow pathway with nothing to grab along the way. But at the very end, fortunately, since I did have the catsuit power-up, I noticed that if I climbed that back wall before continuing moving forward, I was able to grab the second green star. After that, it's back to more swimming in blocks of water that are just somehow defying all of the laws of physics. As they traverse along blocks of spikes, allow you to carefully swim around all of these hazards along your way and making sure you keep hold of your catsuit power-up because once again, in order to reach the bonus room to get the third green star, you need said power-up. Effectively, the whole challenge of this stage is that if you want to fully complete it and grab everything, you're going to need a catsuit. And as you'd expect, it's a lot easier said than done. However, if you are able to accomplish it, you get to the flagpole and you complete the stage. And what awaits beyond that is a ghost stage, a beam in the dark. As soon as you start, you will be gifted a spotlight. Shining these spotlights at the ghosts along your way will allow you to defeat them. Fairly early on, you will also notice a switch with an L on it over to the left side of the stage, so the game wants you to choose Luigi in order to unlock the stamp. And I assume they also want you to choose Luigi because, well, it's a ghost level, so it's kind of Luigi's stage. Eventually, you'll drop down to the next segment and you'll notice in the mirror that there's a green star, so you kind of just have to use your reflection as a guide in order to grab that. And then as you traverse through most of the stage on random platforms that will carry you while you're meant to watch out for all of the enemies along your path, you'll eventually get to a point where the platform is just speeding towards a group of doors. And while it is very easy to miss, and once again, this is a moment in the stage where if you do miss it and you're trying to grab everything, you're probably going to have to start the stage over. There is a bonus warp block over to the right side of the stage. You just have to jump at it as fast as you can. Doing so, it puts you in a bonus room where you have to use a spotlight to defeat all of the boos as fast as you can and grab the green star. After that, it's another circular platform that you have to jump on and allow it to guide you through the stage. This time, however, there are chunks taken out of the circular platform, making it a little bit harder, and I say that from experience because I did lose a few lives, especially as I was trying to get my footing right so I can flash the light on the ghosts. Finally, you make it to a straight path, where you effectively have to avoid the ghosts as well as all of the dry bones along the way. And if you're skilled and fortunate enough to get through all of that, and you see the green star and you want to jump straight to that, but a giant boo pops up. So even grabbing that third green star can be a bit of a pain. And then it's a matter of quickly dropping down with the platform and getting onto the flagpole before it moves even more. Getting through this, I would say, fairly difficult ghost house will give you access to the Mystery House Claw Climb. There are 10 different green stars that you need to collect in this challenge, and most of them will involve climbing. So it is all about the Super Bell. Honestly, I got through all 10 of them without too much of a thought, so it's not really much to talk about here. All in one go without so much as a struggle. Just gotta be quick. Beyond that is World Bowser-7, the Grumblump Inferno. I lost a life pretty quickly here because I didn't realize what was about to happen. And that's because I did not know what the heck a Grumblump was. I would have just called it a flipping block. I'll be real though, even when I did figure out the gimmick of this stage, I did find it pretty hard to stay on top of these things. I think I was trying to jump as they were flipping and I realized that you're much better off just trying to stay on it and moving over the edges as it flips. Felt a bit awkward, to be honest, at least at first. Not quite, secret hidden area of Mario Sunshine awkward, but still awkward nonetheless. The first green star is grabbable by simply jumping off when you get close to the platform where you'll see it right along your path. The stamp is pretty easy to grab as long as you're okay with losing a life. And the third green star is also once again very grabbable, but you'll probably take a hit by the magma balls. Now, I thought the original blocks were awkward. This one was even worse. Something about the fact that it was a lot wider and it wasn't a perfect cube made it feel a bit more disorienting to stay on top of as it was flipping. I mean, honestly, I was fine through most of it. It's when the enemies started jumping on it that threw me off, because I'd jump on top of it and that caused me to fall off. Mind you, the third green star is right on top of them as well, so it's just a matter of getting through that and you can complete the stage. The funny thing is, I lost so many lives that I was just like, screw it, I'm gonna use the invincibility leaf here. But the invincibility leaf is kind of useless, because if you fall into the lava, you still lose a life. So it didn't even do anything for me, except for just make me feel guilty for using the invincibility leaf. Whatever. Before getting to the final stage, there are two blockades, 8A and 8B. The first time is a fight against Motley once again. Not much has changed this time, except when he ground pounds, it'll create a ripple on the floor, so you gotta avoid that. But if you didn't find this to be a challenge the first time, you probably won't find it to be a challenge the second time either. After that, you're visiting the Histocrat again. Then, same as last time, while it is a bit more difficult because there will be more attacks, and fewer of the snakes will actually allow you to jump on their heads, and the game won't generously give you a super bell every chance that it can, so you'll have to defeat this the hard way by actually platforming instead of climbing up the snakes. Despite all of those additional challenges, this fight should be done in one go. And with everything accomplished, 170 green stars is all you need. You can access the final stage in the main game, the Great Tower of Bowserland. As you'd expect, the early spectacle of this is pretty cool. As soon as you start the stage, you'll see Bowser's broken down vehicle, the volcano erupting off into the distance, so you'll have to avoid that while you're running through everything. You're basically on the top of Bowser's castle here. If you're being thorough in your search before moving on to the clear pipes, you'll notice the green star on the bottom of the screen. But either way, you're going to have to be very careful because it's very easy to take a hit. You'll make it to the Ferris wheel that we saw earlier, and you'll have to defeat all of the enemies on there, something that I just did unintentionally because that's the only way to get the second green star. You'll quickly be greeted by Captain Toad before heading over to the skyscraper. And as you run forward, you will be greeted by the great King Bowser, who will put on his super bell and turn into Meowser. Alright, nobody's gonna want to hear this, but I don't really like the cat thing. I don't know, like, it's a cool power-up, I like it in practice, but they were really steering into the whole cat videos craze that was going on during the time where they developed this game, and it made it feel a bit cheap. Now, that being said, over time I have gotten over it because I think the Super Bell and the cat power-up is very useful and very fun to play, especially if you're just running through these stages casually. But Meowser, I don't know, I never quite got over that one. Like, you have a fire-breathing dragon turtle in Bowser, or whatever the hell he is. And it's like, oh, now he has whiskers and he's licking his paw. But I guess to be fair, he still looks pretty cool for a Meowser. Maybe I just really don't like the name Meowser or Cat Bowser. But anyway, going through this challenge, you are actually not fighting him directly head-on. Rather, you are avoiding him as you climb up the tower. This is done by either dodging him in the old-fashioned way by jumping from platform to platform, or by using the clear pipes to get around the tower. As you climb, you'll also be given a chance to collect the 8 coins in a timely fashion to get the final green star. Now, once you do make it beyond all that, Bowser will land in front of you and conveniently sit right on top of a POW block. Slamming it will send him up into the sky, even higher up the skyscraper, and now you're meant to jump into the next clear pipe so you can move upwards with him. It's a spectacle. He's collected double cherries at this point, so there's going to be more than one Meowser now. And as you go up this whole new platforming challenge, jumping between clouds and swinging around, the camera pans, the music gets louder, the cat Bowsers continue to multiply. The epic nature of this entire scene reminds you of everything that you've gone through in this journey, all to get to this very point. To once again have to take on the King of the Koopas, especially in his giant form, in order that you may save what he is holding that is dear to you. In this case, it's not Peach, it's the Sprixies. And while this is certainly nowhere near any of the best final boss fights that we've experienced in the 3D Mario games, the spectacle of it all is very much appreciated. And the climactic nature of rising up to the top of said tower while all of these giant turtles are climbing up behind you, making it to one of the largest POW blocks you'll ever experience in the entirety of this franchise, and slamming onto it 3 times, you send the King of the Koopas off into the distance and free the little Sprixie critters while enjoying some fireworks in the background. And while we know there is so much more to go, and the best part of the game has yet to even start in my opinion, there's something about this final location here where you're sitting on top of the castle, except instead of the dark nature of everything around you, It's a bright and cheerful, serene moment, with a stamp on the tree to your left to grab that so you can check that off, before heading over to the top of this final flag in the base game and celebrating the freedom of your Sprixie friends with the entirety of the team that you took on this adventure. And as much as I would like to conclude and reflect on this adventure while looking at this very enjoyable end credits scene, we all know the best is yet to come. Alrighty, so you guys know how this goes by now. Go through the game and beat Bowser. But wait, there's more. And as the 3D Mario franchise has evolved, the way a player is meant to fully complete these titles has evolved as well. In Mario 64, it was pretty straightforward. You had 70 stars. You were basically allowed to grab whatever 70 stars out of the pool of 120 in order to get to the final boss fight. And then now, if you wanted to go for full completion and make your way to the top of the castle, where your friends from the playground swear that Yoshi awaited you, it was as simple as just going back to every single stage and getting every single star. Moving along to Mario Sunshine, which seemed like it was very similar to Mario 64, whereas in actuality it was a lot more linear because there was an episodic progression through every one of the stages. Going through every single one of those episodes felt like a regular linear challenge, which focused more on the action platforming and less on the 3D collectathon aspect that we saw in Mario 64. So the full completion, I would argue, is going out of your way to collect every single one of the blue coins in the game. And remember, there were a lot of them. 240 collectibles. And they were hidden. It was a lot more about the collectathon and less about the linear platforming by that point, which made the exploration feel like the bonus content in this title. This was peeled back quite a bit in the next game of Mario Galaxy. The bonus content in that title just had you go through the entire game all over again, only this time it was with Luigi, which I will admit, going through Mario Galaxy 1 with Luigi is a lot more fun than going through it with Mario because they make the challenges a little bit more difficult and his general control is a bit quicker and more slippery. But it's not a new game, it just feels like a hard mode. Actually, it's more like a normal mode, whereas the Mario Adventure was like a very simple beginner's mode. But the point is, the full completion challenge of Super Mario Galaxy 1 was just doing the entire game over again. Now for Mario Galaxy 2, they changed it up just a little bit. They did have you revisit every single stage again, just like you did in Super Mario Galaxy 1, doubling the number of stars, so it's the same thing. You're going through the stages again and collecting the same amount of stars you collected the first time, only in Galaxy 2 they effectively rebought the Collectathon challenge. I discussed this a bit at the top of the retrospective, but the Green Star Challenge in Super Mario Galaxy 2 felt a lot more like the blue coin collection that we saw in Sunshine. You're going back into these linear objectives just like you did back in Super Mario Sunshine, only this time, instead of heading towards the main objective and trying to complete it the way that the game wanted you to, you're looking for a collectible. In Mario Sunshine's case, it was the blue coin. In Mario Galaxy 2's case, it was the green star. And while there are a few exceptions, for Super Mario Galaxy 2, it goes back to the themes that we saw in some of the earlier games prior to Galaxy 1, where the base game felt like a linear challenge, and the full completion of the title was all about the search and exploration collectathon. It wasn't until Super Mario 3D Land where these things were kind of combined. As players went through their adventure in Super Mario 3D Land, they could either reach the end of the goalpost or they can grab the collectible medal along the way. So in theory, if a player was interested in full completion, they could combine those two challenges together. You go through the platforming stage, and then as you go through that platforming stage, even though it is linear, you are searching everywhere, making it partially a search and exploration collectathon. It's not a sandbox, but it's a linear search and exploration just like we saw in Mario Galaxy 2. And since those were combined into one, since those star medals could be completed and collected as you're going through the adventure, unlike in Galaxy 2 where you had to revisit it after completing the game the first time, the actual full completion of the title had to be done a little bit differently, because you've already done all of the stages and you've already done all the search and exploration. So in Mario 3D Land, they just doubled the size of the game. Instead of throwing new objectives into all of the old stages again like they did in Galaxy 2, they just doubled all of the levels again, and rather than having players revisit all of those levels, they reused a plethora of those assets, while increasing the difficulty both in the platforming as well as in the searching for the medals, making them either a bit more difficult to find or harder to reach. And with the platforming being more difficult, even for players that are not trying to collect all of the medals, they found the additional stages to be much more of a challenge, giving you a much prouder feeling of accomplishment when you're able to get through all of these tasks. Super Mario 3D World does something very similar to what was done in Mario 3D Land, except I would argue they did a much better job balancing the pre- and post-game content. So as you know, we just went through the entire 3D World experience, right? The base game. And you understand that you're going through all of these linear stages and collecting the stars along the way, very similar to what we did in pretty much every single 3D Mario game before this. I would argue the fundamental 3D World experience is more similar to Galaxy 2 than pretty much any other game in this series. And I would say that the biggest difference is that imagine in Galaxy 2 if they just took all of the green stars to be regular collectibles along the way, rather than only introducing them into the stages after you've beaten the game. That's kind of what we saw in 3D World. So in 3D World, the green stars are just collectibles you can grab and move on, something that will be common in the next title of Mario Odyssey. And in many ways, I think 3D World's experience kind of improves what was done on Galaxy 2 because you're not required to go back and revisit these stages. You can accomplish all of the tasks along your way. And likewise, I think 3D World's experience kind of improves what was done in 3D Land. And that's largely because of the difficulty scaling. So I went through this in depth in my previous video, but most people know this by now. When you're going through the base game of Mario 3D Land, just running through the end of the final world and defeating Bowser, even if you're grabbing all of the MacGuffins along the way, it's very easy, almost mindless. It's not to say that it's not fun, but it's very simple. You can run through all of those stages in a fraction of the time that it would take you to run through the second half of the game, which would be the special worlds. I don't have the exact timing because I've since deleted my footage, but I'm pretty sure the first half of the game took me probably only a quarter of the time of the entire adventure. And arguably, if you're a Mario veteran, if you're somebody that's been playing 3D platformers for a very long time, the true game starts in that second half. In the case of 3D World, however, the scaling and difficulty is done much better. That's part of the reason why I continue to bring it up as I discuss every single one of the worlds. There's a very good difficulty curve here. It's not perfect, but it's much better than what was done in the previous title. So as you get to the end of World 8 and you defeat Bowser, if you're somebody that doesn't care much about going for full completion, I feel like you've still gotten a pretty good 3D platforming experience. And that's made all of the better if you decided to collect all of the MacGuffins on your way. But if you are somebody that's looking for more of a challenge, 3D World once again takes the idea from 3D Land and adds more worlds beyond the base game, and similar to what was done in 3D Land, there are reused assets, there are remixed stages, there are once again familiar set pieces that are just made more challenging, but they put a lot more care and effort into these new levels to make them feel a lot less copy-pasted than what was felt in the previous title. And this is largely because they didn't add too many more stages. They didn't go for the same approach as 3D Land and add 8 worlds worth of stages, which made many of the stages in 3D Land feel redundant. Instead, they went for quality over quantity, adding just around 30 stages for the end game, everything beyond the base game. And those stages are spread across only 4 worlds, the Star, Mushroom, Flower, and Crown worlds. In comparison, you're looking at roughly 3 times the same amount of stages in the base game, sitting at around 90 stages. So the end game, the full completion challenge if you will, is only 1/3 of the size of everything that came before. But to give you an idea of just how much they amped up the difficulty for that end game, it took me just about 10 hours to get through the first 8 worlds, collecting everything along my way, and going based on the length of my footage, it took me another 9 hours to get through everything beyond that Bowser Castle. So we're looking at almost the same amount of time that it took to complete 1/3 of the stages. And I think that's a good way to gauge just how much more it's amped up in the end game. Now, to be clear, however, of those 9 hours in the end game, 3 of those alone were in the last world, which features both the final challenge as well as the final mystery house. But still, in 3D Land, it felt like running through the beginning of the game was just, a practice. An appetizer, if you will, and then the majority of the game takes place after you get through World 8. Over here, it's almost perfectly balanced. They made the first half of the game, the base game, long enough and difficult enough, and they pumped it up just enough in the end game, the full completion challenges, to double the length of the time it would take to complete this title without making it feel like it's redundant. And I would say the challenges in these stages are very welcome, both in the remix platforming, the enemy placements, the creativity behind the level design, as well as how they place the MacGuffins to collect along the way. The designers of these stages respect the player, and it shows. And as I was running through the stages, I can tell they were designing them for me, for somebody that wants to be tested in a 3D Mario game, which does have a tendency, especially now in comparison to back in the early 2010s, to start off, quite frankly, way too easy. Now, I'm not going to break down every single one of these stages. That will take way too long, and with so many reused assets and set pieces, it might get a little bit too wordy. But just like I've done in previous titles, this is the fast-paced lightning round portion of the retrospective. We're going to fly right through these collectibles. So pop your popcorn, grab your drink, and don't blink. Let's do this. Alright, so after defeating Bowser, you're thrown back to the beginning of the game, and you find the Sprixies working on this little piece of land over here. Somehow they magically convert it into a rocket ship, and you blast off into outer space, entering into World Star. I personally think you're going a little bit too big by starting with the star first. The order of operations is generally mushroom, and then flower, and then star. But clearly they have a reason for going for the star. And you kinda get a hint of that almost immediately because you see a Luma over to the right. But anyway, it's time for World Star-1, Rainbow Run. You can tell almost immediately, we've been here before. But they added just enough to make it more challenging, between the enemies and the little bumpers that cause the seismic waves. First green star will be right around the cylindrical platforms when you can climb the wall up just behind it, and then you're going to be tasked with making 2 different balls land in 2 different locations, so you can collect the green star. Fortunately, if you make a mistake, you can get out and jump back in. Eventually you make it to a Plessie segment and the stamp can be collected pretty easily off to the right side. After going through that Plessie segment, using the fire flower, if you light up the 2 torches just ahead of you, there will be a cloud that pops up. You'll enter a bonus room where you have to light up an 8-bit platform just like we did earlier with Mario, only this time it's a platform of Link. The NES Link, to be exact. And that will give you the 2nd green star. And finally, the 3rd green star is just beyond that, where you grab 8 green coins. Star-2, appropriately named Super Galaxy. It's a level that is obviously an homage to the Galaxy game. Takes place in outer space, contains these rotating red and blue platforms, as well as the Octumbas that fire projectiles over at you. The first green star will require you to jump at the exact right time as the platform is rotating to reach. The stamp will be just beyond the checkpoint, allowing you to try to wall jump and work your way up these platforms that are rotating vertically. The 2nd green star will be hidden underneath one of the rotating platforms off to the side in this area, and the final green star can be grabbed near the end of the stage on the blue platforms that are below, while you can see the Comet Observatory in the background. And as you do head over to the end of the stage, you will find Rosalina standing next to a Luma. And as you celebrate the end of the stage, Rosalina is there celebrating with you, which means you effectively have unlocked her as a playable character. Yeah, that's the 5th character of the game. So technically, if you're going for the true full completion of this title, in that you want to grab every single one of these stamps, that's an extra playthrough of every single stage, even if you went through the entire game in 4-player co-op, because you are required to touch the flagpole with every single character in every single stage for true 100% completion, although you don't need to do it to unlock the final stage. But I'll get to that shortly. For now, we're looking into World Star-3, the Rolling Ride Run. Now, Rosalina, while she doesn't have Peach's glide, she does have a bit of an extra jump, an ability to course correct in midair, similar to what you were able to do with Mario when you shook the Wii remote in Mario Galaxy. In this stage that's made up of a bunch of different blocks of various shapes and sizes, you're mostly going to be guiding your character along all of these rolling cylinders, and the first collectible can be seen in this bonus room, which puts you in like this hamster wheel-like contraption where running in a circle will give you access to the first green star. Now, green star or otherwise, this stage alone is very difficult. Having the boomerang flower will help just a little bit, especially when you get to some of the later enemies, but I immediately noticed how much harder this game was going to be when I got to this level. Again, this is like the first few levels of the end game. Then I very quickly got a game over. After the checkpoint, there's a lineup of thinner cylindrical platforms that will rotate, and at the front end of one of them there is a notch that sticks out, and the 2nd green star is over there. And in the final challenge, when you're expected to move this giant cylinder over, which once again is a lot easier said than done, off in the platforms to the side you will find a button to push, and fortunately I was already using Rosalina because she's needed for this button, and that will give you the stamp. And finally, in this same area, the 3rd green star is going to require you to get a hold of the double cherry power-up, which is not that hard, but you gotta keep hold of it as you're rolling this giant cylinder along, which is actually that hard. If you're able to do that and head through this very long and narrow tunnel, at the very end there's a platform with a number 2 on it, which will take you up to the final green star and give you a clear path to the end of the stage. And moving on from there, it's World Star 4, the Great Goal Pole. And the whole gimmick here is that you're chasing the final flag. You gotta move as fast as you possibly can to grab it. Along the very small and narrow path, you will find the various collectibles. It's usually just a minor sidestep or a detour. The 3rd one can be a little bit harder because you have to jump up onto the platforms above the flagpole. Really, the collectibles weren't much of an issue in this stage, it's just being fast enough to actually get a hold of that flagpole. I kept running out of time before the end. And then what's worse is that when I was finally able to actually complete the stage, I couldn't get a hold of the top of the flagpole, because you had to go to the top portion for that. So I did what any sane person would do. I came back and did this level again, only this time with a cat suit. That would guarantee that I get access to the top of the flagpole. And I also used Toad. The whole level took less than 10 seconds this way. After that is a Toad stage. Captain Toad takes a spin. The big gimmick here is that every time you hit one of these switches, it will rotate the entire level, so you just have to plan accordingly so you can grab all 5 stars as you do so. Pretty easy, nothing really all that special. Beyond that is World Star-5 Super Blockland. This is the typical repeated trope that we've seen quite a few times in this franchise. The blocks are massive. There's a bonus warp block that can be found up above near the end of the first area, and accomplishing that bonus room will obviously give you the first star. And before moving on to the next area, if you notice down below, there's a glowing block. Ground pounding that block and breaking it will give you access to the stamp. After the checkpoint, if you use some bombs, you're able to get access to the second green star. And in the final segment where you're avoiding charging chucks and trying to collect 5 keys, at the very end of that segment there will be a challenge where you can wall jump all the way to the top and grab the final green star. And with that accomplished, it's time for the Honeycomb Starway. So this is a top-down auto-scroller. It's going to be very difficult. Having and keeping hold of the boomerang is basically going to be necessary. In fact, you need it early on in order to activate a switch which will give you access to the first green star. Eventually, you'll get to a point where there's a double cherry, which is very useful because now with that compounded with the boomerang flower, you get double the projectiles. And that's useful because in the next area, you have to use those double boomerang attacks to defeat all the enemies to grab the second green star. Moving along and dealing with piranha plants and bees that are coming all around you. Hopefully you still have the boomerang because the third green star will be just above a pit of lava. Of course, you can just take the L and jump into that lava and grab the green star before you lose a life. But that also means you have to start this auto-scroller all the way from the very beginning, which is its own frustration. And it's the same idea with the stamp. If you don't have the boomerang, you're gonna have to take a long jump off to the end and grab it and then lose your life again. Here's the kicker, however. This stage is still difficult even if you're not trying to grab all the collectibles. I basically had to go through it again after I already collected everything and I still struggled. Fortunately, I did manage to get through it without getting a game over, which meant I didn't have to collect everything more than once. And after that, it's World Star-7, the Gargantuan Grotto. The aesthetics are pretty unique here. It still takes place inside a forest theme, which we've seen before, but not with this type of camera angle. As you run through this stage, eventually you'll be stopped by a pair of giant Galoombas. You'll need a Mega Mushroom to take them down, and that Mega Mushroom will actually be required to access the next part of the stage. But don't be too quick, because if you accidentally ground pound like I did, you'll completely miss out on collecting the stamp. The first green star is seen just above these things. The second green star can be spotted before heading into the final warp pipe if you know to swim up above. And actually the third green star is right next to that, instead of going down to the warp pipe. If you happen to notice a shining light coming down from just above it, you can swim up there and there's another warp pipe. Entering that will put you in a bonus room where you can grab the third star after grabbing all of the blue coins with the Mega Mushroom. And then it's World Star-8, Peepa's Fog Bog. You're in a pretty massive stow stage here. It's kind of a giant sandbox, compounded with a haunted theme and ghosts all around. You're tasked with grabbing the 8 keys so you can advance to the next part of the stage, and there will be tombstones and doors all around. The first green star can be found by going over to the tombstone in the right where it's glowing on the ground pounding over there, which will give you access to a star, running over to the other side of this area and defeating all of the ghosts that are surrounding Captain Toad, where he will grant you the green star. The second green star can be found just beyond the checkpoint. After you get into that area, there will be platforms that rise in and out of the fog, and these platforms are actually bridges over bottomless pits, so you gotta be careful about where you're running. You'll get to a platform where off to the right side is a bonus room. You know the drill, you get into that bonus room and you accomplish the task and you'll be given the green star. And just further beyond that is the third green star, where I think you're supposed to have a boomerang so you can fling it onto there, but in my case I just jumped off and grabbed it. And finally, the stamp is just before the end of the stage. Going over to the right before getting to the final warp block, players will be able to grab it before heading for the home flag. Which now takes us over to World Star-9, then Cosmic Cannon Cluster. You're on a rail through this stage, jumping on the platforms that either take you forwards or backwards, and you are given the projectile cannon to help you defeat the enemies as well as the bombs that are heading towards you. Pretty early on, off to the right side, you'll be able to activate a bridge by shooting the right question mark block so you can access the stamp. After that, it's an old school platforming bit. In order to get up to the next ledge, you need to jump on the top of these cannons as they fire out at you and jump to the next one. Making it up to this platform, especially with a cannon, will allow you to break the wall off to the right, which will grant you the first green star. Moving along will take you underwater, where the second green star can be found by blasting some blocks along your way. And after the checkpoint, you'll be back onto a set of rails, where you're basically gonna have to properly snipe all of these blocks that are off into the distance so you can set the track to go the direction that you want it to move. All of this while timing your shots and carefully moving the platform left and right. And keep in mind, in order to make the bullets go far enough to actually hit these blocks, you need to charge up the shots, which requires even more careful planning and timing. In any case, shooting one of those blocks will give you access to the green star, but it's kind of annoying because you're still still going to have to shoot that green star, do not accidentally swing right off the cliff like I did. And now that you have everything, while it may seem like it's just a simple straight shot to the end of the stage, in actuality you do have to make a few more careful shots over on an angle so you can build the bridge and head to the final flagpole. And fortunately, there's no final castle. That's it. You completed the entirety of Star World. Now it's time for World Mushroom. And jumping straight into the fungi world is the Mystery House Brawl. 10 green stars for you to collect here. As the title suggests, there's a lot of fighting in this one. You're basically going through different rooms where you have to defeat various enemies in order to collect the green stars. I actually did find a little bit of struggle with this one, so I decided to go get a catsuit power-up and come back and made it a lot easier. That melee attack is hard to compete with. After that, it's World Mushroom -1, Night Falls on Really Rolling Hills. It's a repeat of the stage from earlier, only this time it's nighttime and there's a fast time limit. As a quick side note, this is where the stages stop having stamps. You're just collecting green stars now, so that is one less MacGuffin to worry about. The first green star will be a ring in this area over here where you have to grab all of the coins. The second green star can be found when you're going through this underground area. If you notice that there's a cloud that's invisible, you can jump onto and reach the star. And the third one is in a bonus room in the area just below that. And moving on, it's another repeated stage, just with harder enemies along the way in Mushroom-2. This stage also includes the introduction of the Lucky Bell, basically the same thing as a cat bell, only when you ground pound you turn into a statue, similar to the classic Tanuki suit. The first green star is right along your path, but it's hidden behind a tree, so you might not notice it immediately. Breaking some blocks on the wall will give you access to a bonus room where you can find the second green star, and the third green star can be found by climbing all the way to the peak of the stage. Random side note, you do have to finish this level with the catsuit power-up if you want to reach the top of the flagpole. After that, it's the Deep Black Jungle Drift, a repeat of the level in the jungle when you're on the raft, only this time it's nighttime and it's a ghost stage apparently. The first green star can be grabbed by jumping on top of blocks followed by an invisible cloud in order to reach it. The second green star can be found right before you get to that final waterfall. Off to the side there are some invisible clouds you can walk on that will take you to the star. And the final green star is basically in the same location it was last time, only this time instead of using a catsuit, you can jump on top of the spotlights in order to reach it. After that, it's back to the shadow stage in Trouble in Shadow Play Alley. And you're given a time limit here, so you gotta be quick. First green star can be spotted pretty early on. You're going to have to avoid some cannon shots in order to reach high enough to grab it. The second green star is just beyond that. It's just sitting there right in front of a pretty high stack of Goombas. And the third green star is over in the top right corner of that same section. Now, if you're not quick enough, you will run out of time because you have to defeat all of those Goombas as fast as possible in order to get to the next area. Fortunately, on a repeat of this stage where you don't have to collect the stars, it's a lot easier to get through it in the allotted time limit. After that, it's back to Hands-On Hall, which is cool because I really liked Hands-On Hall the first time around. Same concept, you're gonna have to poke around in order to advance through the stage. It is laid out a bit differently, however, this time around, making the stage feel a lot more unique in comparison to the previous one. The first green star can be found in a clear pipe. If you do not have a fire flower, you're gonna take a hit on this one. The second green star can be found when you get outside and get to the checkpoint. You're meant to use the propeller hat to collect the 8 coins before the time runs out. And the third green star, which we can see from the window, is going to be in that same location where we fought a spike the first time around. However, in order to access it, you're not going to have to go inside the building. Instead, there are 2 gongs on the outside that if you're anything like me, you're probably going to slam them anyway, and that's going to cause a warp block to spawn, which will take you right to that green star. After that, there is a little bit of a challenge to get to the top of the flagpole because it is moving around. So using the propeller suit, you have to land on the top of the flagpole. And beyond that, it's stage 6, the gigantic seasick wreck. The first green star can be found very quickly by going through a ring and avoiding getting blown off of the ship. The second green star can be found just before the midpoint of the level. Instead of heading straight into the warp block, there is a platform you can walk on over to the back right, and said platform, if you're careful, will take you directly to the star. And after going through that warp block by grabbing a mega mushroom, if you're careful in your traversal along the plank that teeters as you walk on it, you can jump up and reach the green star before heading to the end of the stage, which will be very easy to reach because you'll grab a mega mushroom and just do a bunch of ground pounds to knock all of the bullies off the stage. And after that, it's the Broken Boo Bully Belt. This is kind of interesting because it's the hard version of a stage that I found was already hard in the base game. The first green star can be found with a careful leap over the lava by landing on the platform when it pops up. The second green star can be found in that same location with all of the spinning spike balls with the center platforms that you can jump on. And the third one can be found while going through the final stretch of the stage, the linear platforming obstacle course. It sits near the end just beyond the warp pipe. And right after that, with no rocket ship or anything, you move straight into World Flower. The Switch Shock Circus. Right when you start the stage, if you decide to move backwards instead of going forward like you're supposed to, you'll find a warp block and it'll take you to a puzzle that you gotta solve in order to grab the first green star. Really, the puzzle is basically just sliding down the wall as if you're gonna wall jump in order to make all the switches a different color. As you solve more of these puzzles of the switches in order to advance throughout the stage, you'll eventually get to a section where you can grab a green ring so you can collect the 8 coins and grab the second green star. And then when you solve the final challenge with the remaining switches, which admittedly took me about 3 attempts to get through, you can break some crates to grab some baseballs in order to throw them and grab the final green star. And if you miss your throw, you can always just jump and take the L. After that, it's Flower Dash 2, the Floating Fuzzy Time Mine, a more difficult version of the auto-scroller where the fuzzies are chasing you. The first green star can be found pretty quickly off to the right by using the water to swim to it. The second green star can be accessed by using the POW block to destroy the giant block. And then after that, the fuzzies start to double time it. They move a lot quicker. And as that's happening, all of a sudden, there's a green ring that you gotta run through and grab the 8 coins, which is actually pretty hard. It involves running on top of spikes, utilizing cubes of water to jump to springboards and use those springboards to access the coins. It is very easy to fail that challenge in particular, and what's worse is when you do fail it, you have to start the stage from the very beginning, and need I remind you, this is an auto-scroller, so you're moving at the stage's pace, not your own. Yeah, this is a hard one. It took me quite a few attempts to get through it. And the reward for completing that very difficult stage is an even more difficult stage, the Piranha Creeper Creek After Dark. We've basically seen this stage before, but we haven't seen it like this, with the lights off. There are fire flowers all around. They're not only useful because you can use them to defeat the enemies, but they are also required because as you do defeat all the enemies, you have to light every single torch along the way. But I did not realize that until I got to the very end of the stage and I lit all of the torches that were right before the flagpole and was given the 3rd green star. See, I went through most of the stage wondering why I could not find the green stars, and it's because that's the whole gimmick of this stage. You have to light up the torches. So yeah, redoing the stage, lighting up all of the torches, I was able to find the 1st green star, and then in the 2nd segment, that's where the challenging part really starts, because reaching the torches takes a little bit more challenge. Either because you have to avoid random flying dry bones, or you have to avoid piranha plants that are spitting fire at you, or even avoiding fireball sticks that are trying to sweep you from under your feet. And then as it goes with these difficult stages, whenever you do fail, you start from the very beginning again. And while it's not all that difficult to make it back to this point in the stage, it can still be very annoying. So yeah, just like in the previous stage, it took me a bunch of lives to get through this one. 20 minutes of playtime, and it is all because of that 2nd green star. But after that, we're going back to Fort Fire Bros, only this time, it's the faster Fort Fire Bros. So there's a time limit here. Right in front of you, there's a stack of Goombas, they're holding the 1st green star for you. The 2nd green star is in the same spot that it was previously. When you get to the thwomps, you jump on top of one of them and it'll take you up to the wall where you can walk to the left and grab that. And the final green star can be found by ground pounding a glowing spot in the floor right before you get to the end of the level. Arguably easier to grab than what we saw the previous time we visited this stage, but in fairness, you have to be quick because there's a time limit. But after that, if you're quick enough, you can make it to the final flag and move on to World Flower Dash 5, the Sprawling Savannah Rabbit Run. So this is kind of fun, it's like a giant playground. Now, it is a very quick stage to get through, especially if you choose Toad just because of how fast he is. I mean, gosh, the 1st green star doesn't even provide a challenge when you choose Toad. You can grab it before it even runs away. The 2nd green star is technically supposed to be done by you going into a clear pipe that'll pop you up onto this cloud, but if you have the catsuit power-up, you can just climb up the clear pipe and grab it. And the final green star is once you get to the end of the stage, sitting just above one of the clouds in front of the final flag. And after that is Shift to Your Boon Mansion. They provide a different color tone in this stage to make it almost seem like it's black and white. Just like last time, if you run through this stage and you jump on top of one of the couches, it'll raise you up where you can get to a stack of clouds and reach and grab the green star. Another green star can be found hiding behind Big Boo on the left side of this corridor. And the 3rd and final green star can be found just at the end of this very quick moving conveyor belt. Mind you, finding the green stars is actually a lot easier than finding the end of the stage here. It's like an endless loop. You run straight, you jump down, try to get into the flag, it disappears, and then you continue on, and where you expect the flag to be ends up being a warp block, which will send you back to the beginning of that same area. I'm not gonna lie, I struggled to find this one, but in the area where the flag actually disappears, if you move to the bottom left corner of that same landing, you will find some invisible clouds that will take you to a warp block, and that'll take you to the end of the stage. So then you can enter the Blast Block Skyway. This one is very quick. The 1st green star can be found over here on top of this block. The 2nd green star can be found right by the checkpoint where you have to grab the ring and grab the 8 coins. And the 3rd green star can be collected as you go down that final slide, which I really struggled with the first time, and I struggled with it again. I did eventually get to the rhythm with how to get down there with the leaf though. Next is the Pipeline Boom Lagoon. This one's kind of annoying because it takes a while for the first green star to show up, so I was spending way too much time searching for something that's not there. And even then, when you do get to that green star, it's just sitting there at the end of the stage. I mean, in fairness, you have to have the cannons in order to break the gray block so you can access it, but still. The second one will be found just before you're meant to go downwards. If you move through the path that's open on top, you can just dodge some spikes and swim straight into the green star. And then when you do go back down, hopefully you still have the cannon hat because you can break the gray wall, access the green ring, and collect the coins so you can grab the third MacGuffin. And that will take us to stage 9, Towering Sunshine Seaside. It's that beach theme stage again, only this time you gotta move through it a lot quicker. It's a big scavenger hunt in this open sandbox with a time limit. One of the green stars will be in a clear pipe just behind you when you first start the stage. Another one can be found off to the left side of the screen over here if you light up the 4 torches. Fortunately, there is a fire flower just next to it, so it's kind of obvious. And the third one can be found hidden in the back right corner of the stage on top of a stack of sleeping Goombas. Mind you, exiting the stage will require you to shoot down the fire bro that's sitting on top of a stack of Goombas out in the water. Doing so will spawn a warp block that'll take you to the end of the level. And up next is Fire Flower-10. Back to the Honeycomb Skyway. Again, it's a revisit of a stage that I struggled with the first time around. It's the same concept here, top-down menu. You're going to be using the boomerang quite a bit, including using it to grab the green star that's running away, as well as the option to use it to grab the green star that would otherwise require you to run into the clear pipe. The final area over here where it starts to move very quickly and the platforms just spawn as you move through it, but it's done so at the stage's pace, not at your own pace, is where I found myself struggling the most. Now the green star will be just off to the side, and using a boomerang it'll be easy to grab, if you still have that boomerang of course. But the problem I had throughout the stage was I kept trying to move faster than the stage allows you to go. But I also felt like I had to move faster just because there was so much going on between all of the fire-breathing piranha plants that were shooting at me. I really think this is one of those stages where it's only really hard the first time you do it. Once you realize that at the very end you're supposed to take your time, it's not nearly as difficult. But the thing is, it's not only just one moment where you have to take your time and be careful. There's a decent amount of moments where you're kind of like moving very quickly and it's like, okay, wait, I gotta slow down before I fall right off the stage. And it's all at the very end, so every time you fail, you have to go through the entire slow auto-scroller yet again. But I would argue the worst part of all of this is at the very end of the stage. Once you go through that warp block, you actually have to climb up these platforms very quickly, otherwise you can't make it to the top. Which means you can't access the top of the flagpole. Which means you have to do this entire stage over again, because you don't have a catsuit power-up, unless you were like keeping it with you while going through the stage. But I just had boomerangs, because that's all they offered here. So after I went through the stage again, this is how you're supposed to actually jump up. Just like that. Like, how are you supposed to know that on the first try? Okay, anyway, once you figure that out, you can move on to the next one. Flower-11, the Spiky Spike Bridge Sneak. First green star will either require you to use a catsuit power-up, or you have to kind of use a wall jump plus hover, something that really only Peach can do, which is very useful. The second green star becomes available after the checkpoint. It's right over here by this tower, but I'm not sure what exactly the intended way of getting this is. I assume it's using a boomerang, only I just conveniently had a boomerang. The stage didn't give me one earlier. I didn't really find any invisible platforms to jump on in order to grab it, but they might be there. But anyway, as you get to the very end, there is a giant platform of spikes, and over at the other side of it, if you're careful, you can grab the third green star. Followed by a very intense sequence where you have to avoid the spikes in order to get to the end where the flag is waiting. And the final stage of this world, one of the hardest stages in the game before you get to the actual hardest stages in the game, is Flower-12, the Boss Blitz. So you would think this would be easy because the boss fights are easy in this game. But the problem is, everything, especially boss rushes, can be more difficult once you have to go through them in a single life. I mean, you've done all of these bosses before, so you know what to expect. It's the little square peg that flips around, a fight against Pom Pom, another one against both of the Histocrats together side by side, a fight against Boom Boom, a fight against the giant boulder, and a fight against the motley boss Blob. What's funny is on my first attempt I made it to that final boss Blob, but I ran out of time, like right before the last hit, and for some reason that was my best run. After that, every single time I tried it, I kept failing. And obviously, when you fail, you have to start over, because you gotta go through every single fight in a single life. So what could have been like a less than 10-minute one-time attempt for me ended up taking up like 30+ minutes of game time. Okay, look, I'm probably overselling it by saying it's one of the hardest stages in the game. It's one of the most time-consuming ones, because a simple failure in these boss fights that otherwise should be pretty easy can require a whole lot of time in order to repeat it. As far as the 3 green stars are concerned, 3 of the enemies, once you defeat them, will give you one of the MacGuffins. So it's not really anything you have to go out of your way for. Now that boss rush is kind of a conclusion run on its own. Many players might actually consider that the end of the game. I mean, it is a good finale. You went through some very hard worlds between the star, mushroom, and flower, and if somebody didn't care about reaching the top of every single flagpole or didn't care about collecting stamps along their way, this might be good enough for them. They might be like, you know what, I'm done. This is way too much. This is the end of the game for me. But obviously, since this game did not come out in the Stone Ages, everybody knew about the final world, and more specifically about Champion's Road in said final world. But to access the final world, you have to have reached golden flagpoles, which means you have to touch the top of the pole on every level. You have to collect all 76 stamps, which means basically grabbing every single stamp along the way throughout the stages, as well as the little bonus rooms that have popped up throughout the adventure. And you are required to have collected 342 green stars, which is just us, what we've done. We've grabbed everything along the way. Or I guess I thought I did, because I only had 339 green stars. So this was the point in time where I had to do some housekeeping, go back and figure out what I missed. I think there was also a single stage that was in the special worlds that I forgot to get the golden flagpole in too, so I had to go back and do that one again with the cat suit, and that was pretty easy. But as far as those final green stars were concerned, it turns out in worlds 5, 6, and 7, otherwise known as Castle, there were 3 different blockades that I missed. And it's entirely because I didn't think to interact with these little bits of rubble on the ground. There were some broken rocks. I pressed A. It brought up a warp pipe. I was able to access a stage where I just jumped on a Fire Bro real quick and got the green star. I went to World 6, same idea. Fire Bro's hideout number 3. I jumped into this stage and defeated the 5 different Fire Bros that were all around me so I can get the next green star. And likewise over in World Castle. Fire Bro's hideout number 4. I beat these guys without using a single power-up or taking a single hit. And then I got a notification that the final world was open. And let me just say this, I was so ready for World Crown, because I thought that World Crown was just going to contain Champion's Road and nothing else. And I was able to defeat the very difficult final stages in Mario Galaxy 2 as well as in Mario 3D Land, with the 3D Land one in particular being a lot easier than I expected. And after all of the challenges and all of the pain and all of the searching that I endured throughout the entirety of Super Mario 3D World, I thought going into Champion's Road, specifically going into World Crown, was going to be a lot easier than I expected. I mean, I figured at this point, I was like, oh, it's probably like an hour left of the game tops. As you guys know, because I mentioned it earlier, this is, 3 hours remaining for me. But it was even worse than that. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's head to World Crown and discuss this over there. As much as Mario 3D World is similar to Mario 3D Land, when it comes to full completion of either of these titles, there is one change that, while it might seem minor at face value, is a massive change and definitely for the better in favor of 3D World. So just like in 3D Land, there are 5 stars that you can get over your saved file that imply that you fully completed the game. And just like in 3D Land, in order for those stars to be glittering, you have to never use the invincibility leaf when it shows up after you die 8 times in a level. And the requirements for those 5 stars are beating World 8, collecting all of the green stars in all of the worlds, collecting all of the stamps in all of the worlds, and getting to the top flag in every level for all of the worlds. Those 4 stars are all prior to World Crown. The final star, the 5th one, you have to complete the 3 World Crown levels with all of the collectibles and beat every level with all 5 characters, excluding the Captain Toad levels. And this is very similar to what we saw in Mario 3D Land. You have to beat the game with every single character. The difference is, in Mario 3D Land, it was only 2 characters, whereas in Mario 3D World, there are 5 characters. Now, if you happen to have a friend around, you can actually get through 3D World with all 5 characters through a co-op experience. Since you're allowed to have up to 4 players play at once, technically you can get through this entire adventure and fully complete it by only running through it twice, as long as you have a friend available. There are ways to cheese this, however, and in the past this is how I fully complete the 3D World. While back in the day I did play through, I would say, most of this game with my friends right there alongside with me. When I decided that I wanted to go out of my way to fully complete 3D World, I cheesed it by simply keeping some extra controllers handy. Basically, you play through the level as you normally would, and then when you get to the final flag, you activate those controllers, log in with the extra characters, and everybody's got to be very quick and jump onto the flag. It does require a lot of efficiency to do this alone, but it's doable. But the number of characters is actually, in my opinion, not the biggest change between 3D Land and 3D World, at least when it comes to full completion. I would argue, and I have no stats to back this up, there's very likely a larger percentage of people that played 3D Land and actually went out and got the 5 stars, in comparison to the percentage of people that decided to get 5 stars after starting 3D World. And the reason for that is in order to actually get to the final stage, that big major final challenge in 3D Land, World 8-Crown, you have to have played the game in its entirety with both Mario and Luigi. So you cannot access that final crown stage if you're not planning on getting all 5 stars. Meaning you actually miss out on probably one of the most memorable moments of the game if you're not going for full completion. But in 3D World, gracefully, they decided to allow you to go to World Crown without having to beat the game with all of the characters. So I would argue just being able to access World Crown and going through Champions Road, for most people, they would consider that full completion. That might be enough for most players to decide they don't even want to go back and play the game a second time, whereas with 3D Land, you had to play the game twice, basically. So while technically you haven't fully completed Mario 3D World if you didn't beat it with every single character, I think most people would be more than satisfied sacrificing those final 5 stamps and foregoing that 5th star, and just consider the accomplishment of the final world, World Crown, to be the end of their completion story. At least that's what I think. I personally don't think Mario 3D World is worth revisiting with the other characters, in the same way that I don't think that Mario Galaxy 1 is worth playing again with Luigi. Maybe like on a repeat playthrough if you come back to revisit it after a few years. But otherwise, I don't think the alternate characters, while they do change the game up a little bit, offer enough to make it worth going through the entire adventure again just for 5 stars. But I also have a very different mentality for gaming than many other people do, especially when it comes to full completion. I think there are a lot of people that get anxiety when it comes to full completion, at least this is what I've seen both in my comments as well as discussions online. That need to get to 100% just kind of lingers in the back of their heads, and they have to do whatever they can to make sure they grab it. And for those that enjoy it, by all means, do your thing, but I think a lot of people put too much pressure on themselves to fully complete these titles. And I faced a backlash for this in many of my previous videos where I suggested that going for full completion is not worth it, and in games that do require you to go through the entire adventure a second or third or even 4th time in order to access a final story segment, it's more worth it to just go through it once and download a completed save file. This was a major talking point I had during my Sonic retrospectives on my main channel a few years ago. Games like Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, and even Sonic and the Secret Rings. I don't like what they require players to go through in order to get to that full completion, so I set my own rules, because that's what made me enjoy those titles. And if other people don't consider that true full completion, I don't care. Instead of doing 10 run-throughs of Shadow the Hedgehog in order to get to the final story, I think 5 is more than enough to get most of the experience that you want out of this title, and then a completed save file can get you to the final story. Shoot, in Sonic and the Secret Rings, Sonic actually controls better as you go through the adventure, and I knew that going into it because I played it when I was younger. So when I revisited the title, I found a save file that was further along in the game so I can go through all of the levels from the very beginning in the linear fashion that would get you through to the final end of the game. And what I found was a Sonic game that had wonky controls until you get to about, 5 to 10 hours into it, with stages and levels that felt like nothing but filler. But on my most revisit from a couple of years ago, I had a very different experience. It felt like a really fun, admittedly gimmicky, motion-controlled Sonic game that only lasted about 4 or 5 hours and was just a joy to get through. Now, these requirements to achieve 100%, I would say, is still probably bad game design. I don't think there should be any elements of a game that are locked behind repeating the entire game over and over again. Even in my previous 3D Land retrospective, while I said that in the past I did decide to play the game twice, once with Mario and once with Luigi so I can actually get full completion, when I did this most recent retrospective, and I said it back in that video, I was completely fine with going through to the end of the adventure and then getting a completed save file to not have to repeat every single level again. I just don't think the final levels or the ending story segments should be locked behind these types of experiences. In 3D World, however, I'm completely okay with the way they did it. There are a few stamps. It's a 5th star on the save file. That can be the reward for going through the game over and over again. But if they had locked Champions Road behind that, I'd be singing a very different tune. Now, World Crown actually consists of 3 very different stages. One of them is the final Captain Toad level. As you'd probably expect, this is the easiest one. I got through it in one try, just like every other Captain Toad stage in this game. And obviously most people know about Champions Road, but something I actually completely forgot about was the Mystery House Marathon, which is arguably harder or even just as hard as Champions Road. I won't entirely blame the Mystery House Marathon and Champions Road as the reason as to why it took me almost 4 months to get this retrospective out the door, but I would be lying if I said they didn't have something to do with it. I kept trying to get through these and they were a struggle, failing over and over and over again. And the worst part is, I was not getting better. Somehow, I was actually getting worse with each attempt. It was very demoralizing. I contemplated going through the retrospective without fully completing them. I contemplated getting started on the retrospective and then going back to play them again once I got to the point where I needed to conclude the video. Heck, for an admittedly very brief moment, I even considered lying and pretending that I completed it when I didn't. But it just didn't sit right with me. And I wanted to go through this the way I've gone through every other game so I can properly discuss it. I wanted to fully complete this title and then make my retrospective video. That's how I've done these 3D Mario games. And that little cloud was just on the back of my mind for over a month probably, where I just kept thinking, I'm like, at some point I have to sit down no matter how many hours it takes and I gotta go through this over and over again until I beat it. And every single time I thought about that, I'm like, not today. I just don't have the time for it or the patience. And that just dragged everything. It slowed down the entirety of productivity of my channel, believe it or not. Because I'm like, I don't want to start playing the next game until this one's done, and I don't want to make a video on it unless I fully complete it. And I was kind of wondering why I was struggling with this. I'm like, I've gone through this game before. I've done these stages and these challenges before. What's so different about this time? I'm just not enjoying the challenge. And then I was hit with a sudden realization. I've never actually gone through the ending of Mario 3D World alone. Remember, most of my experience with Mario 3D World prior to doing this retrospective series was that it was a co-op game. It was meant to be played in multiplayer. This most recent run-through is when I realized there's a lot more to be enjoyed about this game from a single-player angle than I thought. And as much as you might want to hear me say that I went through this game and decided to go through the final Champions Road all by myself and accomplish something I never done before, that's actually not what happened. Something better happened. At least I think it was better. I had a couple of my cousins over for a random game night. We were kind of fumbling around between our library, thinking about calling it a night early, and then we just got to talking about 3D Mario and whether or not there was going to be a game coming, and we started talking about 3D World. So I casually decided to turn on the final challenge because I'm like, oh, you guys want to give it a shot? I'm struggling with this one. And then, everybody tried it for a few minutes. I thought we were just going to play it. They're going to fail a couple of times and we'll put it away. But then I noticed after 10 to 15 minutes, suddenly all three of us had a character and we were trying to go through this challenge together. I jumped up so fast and started to record the footage. I'm like, okay, if we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this tonight. We started off being very competitive, racing each other, jumping over one another to make sure we're the one that does the final challenge, trolling each other excessively, popping a character's bubble when they're over a bottomless pit, just having a good laugh and having some fun and figuring that we can beat it as we normally do by being extremely competitive. But then as time went on, we realized we were never going to get through this game by doing it this way. We actually started to work together. We started to give each other space, allowing a player to commit to a specific challenge, while the other two would watch and wait for them to fail or succeed before they start their attempt, so we don't get in each other's way. And our lives were being shared, so we had to be supportive. We had to hope that they wouldn't fail in their challenges. We knew who excelled at every challenge, staying completely out of the other player's way and remaining in a bubble until they would pop you when it was time. We had gone through it so much that it was almost as if it was choreographed and meant to be played that way. Almost like it was a relay race. When someone would fail, the other person would remind them what they did wrong the next time around. If somebody was the best at a specific challenge 6 or 7 attempts ago and they suddenly noticed that they were struggling with it, on the next attempt it got passed off to another player. Eventually the system was almost to perfection and we managed to make it to the ending portion a couple of times before finally accomplishing even that. And I was thrilled. I was so satisfied. I couldn't possibly envision a better way to go through Champions Road. And I figured that took so much off of my mind that I would do the Toad Mystery House Marathon on my own. And mind you, at this point it was after midnight. I figured they were done. They were ready to go home. But they wanted more. They asked me, what else can we do? And so we just started it up again and we went through the Mystery House Marathon, which took almost as long as Champions Road. But it was so worth it. For a number of reasons. It reminded me of the good times that I've had going through these Mario games as a child in co-op, the new Super Mario Bros. Games as well as 3D World. And it reminded me of just how much fun games can be had when you're playing with your friends in the same room on the same couch. Something that I haven't necessarily stopped doing, but we definitely haven't gone through a campaign together, outside of It Takes Two in the last 5 years. But these are the same people that I went through the Halo campaigns, the same people that I went through the new Super Mario Bros. Titles, as well as 3D World over a decade ago. And I was so happy to be doing it again. But more importantly, it reminded me of just how good Nintendo was when they would have tunnel vision and put their mind to something. Mario 3D World was released during a time where people wanted something like Mario Odyssey. 3D World was a Wii U title when people thought that Nintendo was at its worst, and arguably some of their games were at their best. Some of their franchises have peaked with the Wii U, and everything we've seen after has just built off of those. But even beyond that, 3D World was shrugged off by many as just more of what we saw in 3D Land, and 3D Land for many was seen as just, a slightly more 3D version of the new Super Mario Bros. Series when people had such fatigue for that franchise. But Nintendo decided they wanted to take a 3D Mario title and they wanted to make it linear. They wanted you to go after a flagpole and have a giant overworld map, and they wanted the big gimmick of this game to, I guess, be the catsuit power-up, but even more than that, have a 4-player co-op adventure that people can run through this game together with their friends and their family and enjoy it every step of the way, and I think they did that perfectly. While I think that yes, Mario 3D World absolutely should be experienced if you're only a single person playing it. And there's a great time to be had if you are going through it alone, if you happen to have the right group of people to go through this co-op adventure with. Mario 3D World is absolutely at its peak when you go through it as a co-op adventure. And depending on the skill level, depending on your relationship with the person you're playing with, it's entirely possible that one of the best 3D Mario experiences is going through this adventure as a 4-player co-op with the right people around you. Look, I'm very critical of modern Nintendo. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody listening to this, particularly in the way that they operate their business. And even though modern Nintendo is worse, it doesn't necessarily mean that previous Nintendo was also spotless. They had many issues as well. And it is entirely subjective, and it's my own opinion, and I couldn't care less if you agree with it or not. But the 30-year run of Nintendo from the late 80s to the late 2010s is probably the best run of games that I've ever seen or will ever see for the remainder of my life. It's not to say there are no exceptions, both terrible Nintendo games that were made in that time frame as well as great non-Nintendo games that have been made before or after. But that run that started with the NES and took us through the end of the Wii U as well as the earliest years of the Switch 1 had games that were so good that I would think Nintendo will struggle to ever replicate how phenomenal they were. And while it is absolutely ludicrous of how big of a gap there has been after Mario Odyssey to the next 3D Mario title, the fact that the modern Nintendo console allows you to access every single 3D Mario game, with the exception of 3D Land and 64DS, if those alone were the reason somebody told me that they owned a Switch, I would 100% understand it. 3D World was made during a time where I think Nintendo's game design was still at its peak, and I'm glad it was brought back onto the Switch because it did not deserve to be washed away with the Wii U. Re-releasing that title for the Switch after people had gotten their hands on Odyssey and felt like they fulfilled whatever sequel they were looking for from being a child and playing Mario 64, put 3D World in a much more positive light than it would have if it just simply washed away with the Wii U. And I am so grateful that the image of this game is better than it was in the mid-2010s.